Nuestra atención. Esta audiencia se inicia. Estamos aquí para hablar de los componentes de seguridad nacional de la solicitud de crédito adicional del presidente. Nos complace tener a los secretarios Austin y Blinken con nosotros para hablar de los retos que estamos viendo alrededor del mundo y de la urgencia de proveer los recursos necesarios para enfrentar estos retos, apoyar a nuestros aliados y hacer más seguros al mundo y a nuestro país. En nuestra primera audiencia a comienzos de año sobre China, ambos secretarios subrayaron la importancia de aprobar los presupuestos con un componente importante para Estados Unidos y evitar las resoluciones de continuación, lo cual es crucial para mantener a nuestra nación competitiva en el escenario mundial. Ustedes regresan ante esta comisión hoy y creo que todos los miembros del grupo entienden que es importante atender a los mensajes que ustedes nos dejaron la última vez. Estos son momentos difíciles y sin precedentes, y el liderazgo de Estados Unidos será crucial cuando enfrentamos los múltiples retos y amenazas de las que vamos a hablar hoy. Y por eso que el Congreso debe unirse de manera bipartidista y actuar de manera decisiva y con propósito. Este no es el momento de jugar con el liderazgo o con los fondos de los organismos que son necesarios para las necesidades de Estados Unidos. Si nos desviamos de esta misión, me preocupa cuál será nuestra posición en los próximos años. Así que espero que esta comisión pueda seguir a la vanguardia con medidas bipartidistas, bien ponderadas, que tengan la seguridad nacional como una prioridad. Gracias por estar aquí. Este es un momento precario en el mundo. Ucrania sigue su valerosa defensa frente a la brutal invasión de Putin. Israel está todavía sufriendo las secuelas de un terrible ataque de Hamas, un ataque que nunca vamos a olvidar. Con frecuencia, los inocentes son quienes sufren más en las guerras, así que, por supuesto, hay necesidades humanitarias urgentes, incluyendo asistencia para el pueblo de Ucrania y para los países que están atendiendo a los desplazados por la guerra de Putin, y la asistencia para los civiles palestinos en Gaza. También es un imperativo humanitario que Hamas libere a los rehenes que tomó durante su violento ataque. Y por supuesto, la invasión de Putin también ha perturbado las cadenas de suministros alrededor del mundo, generando una crisis de hambre en el mundo entero. Y en la región Indo-Pacífica, nuestros amigos y aliados enfrentan amenazas y agresión, particularmente de parte del gobierno chino. En síntesis, el mundo está en alerta. Y esto será un factor crucial para determinar qué va a ocurrir después de la respuesta de Estados Unidos. Este es el momento de discutir esto de manera seria, sin sesgos partidistas o sectarios. Esta es una oportunidad crucial para nosotros para atender las necesidades del momento, enfrentar los requerimientos urgentes, planificar para el largo plazo y proveer los recursos necesarios para que el mundo sea más seguro para Estados Unidos y sus aliados. Si vamos a hacer esto bien, tenemos que entender cómo se desarrollan estas situaciones en el presente y nuestra estrategia de cara al futuro. Tenemos que apreciar las diferencias entre estos retos, así como también las formas en que están interconectados. Tenemos que ver el cuadro completo sin perder de vista la realidad humana en el terreno. El hecho que en medio de todo conflicto hay civiles, residentes desplazados de sus hogares, rehenes separados de sus familias, gente que enfrenta obstáculos para atender servicios médicos básicos y niños y familias que desesperadamente necesitan agua y alimentos. Y debemos reconocer las complejidades de estos problemas, manteniendo las verdades fundamentales de nuestro trabajo. Para mí eso significa que Estados Unidos debe mantenerse firme al lado de nuestros aliados. No se puede permitir que los dictadores invadan democracias soberanas. El terrorismo no puede ser tolerado y no podemos ignorar a la humanidad y los pedidos de socorro de los civiles atrapados en el fuego cruzado de estos conflictos, a quienes debemos proteger. La solicitud presentada por el gobierno de Biden nos da un plano útil y estamos trabajando en esto para tener una legislación bipartidista que cumpla con las prioridades de seguridad nacional que ha delineado el presidente. Eso significa un paquete que brinde apoyo a los ucranianos que están en un momento crucial de su lucha para proteger su soberanía y para ponerle fin a la brutal invasión de Vladimir Putin. Algo que dejen claro a otros países que traten de copiar la agresión de Putin que van a fracasar. Y al mismo tiempo tenemos que reabastecer las reservas del Departamento de Defensa e incrementar la producción en Estados Unidos. Eso es crucial para que tengamos cadenas de suministro seguras para la defensa de nuestro país. Después que enviamos las armas a Ucrania, estamos reemplazando estas armas con equipo moderno hecho en Estados Unidos. Las supermayorías en el Senado y en la Cámara apoyan el apoyo para Ucrania. Así que llevar estos fondos a su destino no debería ser algo controversial. Este momento también requiere aprobar un paquete que indique que estamos al lado de Israel, que trabaja para proteger a su pueblo después del terrible ataque de Hamas y para disuadir amenazas adicionales, y algo que evite futuras escaladas de violencia en la región y que atienda necesidades humanitarias. Eso significa un paquete que afiance nuestra presencia, apoye a nuestros aliados en la región Indo-Pacífico, nos ayude a mantenernos a la par, mientras el gobierno chino sigue tratando de incrementar su presencia en la región Indo-Pacífico. Y tenemos que entender una tradición importante de Estados Unidos de estar a la vanguardia de las respuestas humanitarias en el mundo y atender necesidades en lugares que están siendo arrasados por conflictos. En Ucrania, en Israel o en Gaza, no podemos perder de vista las necesidades de los civiles cuyas vidas se ven afectadas por los conflictos que los rodean. Asegurándonos que la gente tenga alimentos, agua y atención médica no solamente es un imperativo moral, también es vital para la seguridad y la estabilidad a futuro, para evitar amenazas futuras. También debo decir lo siguiente, como alguien que votó contra la guerra en Irak, me agrada cuando el presidente le advierte a nuestros aliados que no cometan los mismos errores que cometimos nosotros después de los ataques del 11 de septiembre. Es un mensaje importante. Nuestra nación, como aliado de Israel, debe asegurarse que se mantenga el respeto de la ley. Es importante que las partes respeten las normas internacionales, especialmente en tiempos de conflicto. Me complace el mensaje del gobierno de Biden y apoyo los esfuerzos para asegurar el acceso a asistencia humanitaria para los civiles en Gaza. Finalmente, tengamos claro que tenemos que encarar todas estas prioridades como parte de un paquete, porque la realidad es que estos temas están interconectados y todos son urgentes. El gobierno de China está observando cómo respondemos a la agresión de Putin en Ucrania. Putin espera que el ataque de Hamas distraiga al mundo de su brutal invasión y todos nuestros adversarios están observando para ver si nosotros tenemos la visión de reconocer cómo estas crisis están vinculadas y por qué tenemos que responder enérgicamente a las mismas. Nuestros adversarios están vitoreando. Así que vamos a dar una demostración de unidad. Demostremos la fortaleza de la democracia aprobando un paquete fuerte bipartidista antes de dejarles con el vicepresidente de la Comisión. Al enfocarnos en estas necesidades, tenemos que atender necesidades en nuestro país. El cuidado infantil, alivio para comunidades afectadas por desastres, la crisis del fentanilo, las necesidades en la frontera sur y mar. Y tendremos una audiencia separada para encarar estos puntos. Sé que esto es crucial para muchos aquí. Y la semana que viene tendremos la oportunidad de hablar de estos otros temas con el secretario Mayorkas y el secretario Becerra en una audiencia de esta comisión pautada para el 7 de noviembre. Esencialmente enfrentamos múltiples retos de seguridad nacional en el país. El presidente Biden ha presentado una solicitud urgente de fondos adicionales para encarar estas prioridades. Insto a mis colegas de ambas partes a trabajar conmigo en estos temas urgentes. Y si podemos aprobar esto junto con nuestras estrategias de seguridad nacional, ciertamente deberíamos hacerlo. Después de todo, somos los Estados Unidos de América. Nosotros podemos estar al lado de nuestros aliados en el mundo y enfrentar los retos que tenemos en el país al mismo tiempo. Me complace que tengamos esta audiencia hoy para discutir las necesidades de seguridad nacional que el presidente ha planteado ante el Congreso y atender lo que es necesario para disuadir la agresión de líderes autoritarios enfrentar las amenazas terroristas y proteger a los civiles. Entender lo que está en juego para la seguridad de Estados Unidos y para nuestro futuro, si no apoyamos a nuestros aliados alrededor del mundo. Gracias. Los dejo con la vicepresidenta Collins. Gracias por esta importante audiencia. Voy a comenzar expresando mi agradecimiento al secretario Blinken y al secretario Austin por acompañarnos hoy para discutir la solicitud de fondos adicionales que presentó el presidente. Esperaba que el secretario Mayorkas viniera también, pero él está rindiendo testimonio hoy ante otra comisión del Senado. Agradezco que la presidencia haya programado una oportunidad la semana que viene para que el secretario Mayorkas comparezca ante nosotros y describa qué es lo que se necesita para tener seguridad en la frontera, para frenar el influjo de inmigrantes ilegales y la crisis de fentanilo que viene a Estados Unidos. De aquí al final del año fiscal, el 30 de septiembre, hemos tenido 2,5 millones de encuentros en nuestra frontera suroeste. Esta es una amenaza tangible para nuestro país que también debe ser atendida. Las amenazas colectivas que enfrentan los Estados Unidos de parte de Irán y de sus colaboradores y de una Rusia imperialista y una China hegemónica son otros retos que también demandan nuestra atención y nuestra cooperación y la cooperación de nuestros aliados. Los terroristas están lanzando ataques no solo contra nuestro aliado Israel, sino también contra fuerzas estadounidenses en Siria y en Irak. En Ucrania, los patriotas decididos apoyados por Estados Unidos, la Unión Europea, Japón, Australia y otros continúan luchando contra la brutal invasión de Putin, una invasión no provocada. Y en este peligroso juego de China que está hostigando a nuestras aeronaves en la región, están creando problemas en las inmediaciones de Taiwán y presentando problemas también en el Mar del Sur de China. Algunos quieren separar estos elementos para enfocarnos solo en el tema de los terroristas apoyados por Irán, que masacraron a tantos israelíes el 7 de octubre. Debemos reconocer que nuestros intereses de seguridad nacional están enfrentando un reto enorme de todos estos actores autoritarios, tratando de desmantelar el orden internacional que establecimos después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial. Irán ha sido el cómplice de Rusia en Ucrania mediante la exportación de armas y de drones para aterrorizar a los civiles. La semana pasada recibieron a líderes de Hamas y de Irán, donde Hamas elogió las críticas de Rusia a las acciones de autodefensa de Israel después de los recientes ataques terroristas. China se niega a condenar la segunda invasión de Rusia a Ucrania o los ataques de Hamas, a pesar que ambos han cometido crímenes de guerra contra civiles y han robado a niños separándolos de sus familias. Si nosotros no le hacemos frente a esto, habrá consecuencias severas que van a afectar nuestra seguridad nacional. La forma en que voy a analizar estas propuestas del gobierno es muy simple. ¿Esta solicitud hace más seguro a Estados Unidos o no? Déjenme ofrecerles algunas reflexiones. Cuando estuve en Israel con los senadores Graham, Cardin y otros senadores la semana pasada, nos reunimos con familias cuyos seres queridos, incluyendo niños pequeños, estaban siendo mantenidos en rehenes por Hamas. Durante los ataques terroristas del 7 de octubre, asesinaron a padres delante de sus hijos. Las acciones de Hamas no son nada menos que algo de pura maldad y tenemos que apoyar a nuestro aliado Israel la única democracia genuina en el Oriente Medio. Como Israel, Ucrania fue víctima de un ataque no provocado por parte de una potencia reincidente. Tenemos que responder con asistencia para Ucrania para ayudar a repeler las acciones de Rusia. Revisemos qué ha ocurrido desde que comenzamos a ayudar a Ucrania en su defensa frente a la segunda invasión de Rusia. Ni un solo soldado estadounidense ha perdido su vida luchando en Ucrania. Nuestro adversario Rusia está más débil. La OTAN está más fuerte que nunca. Finlandia se ha incorporado a la alianza y se espera que Suecia haga otro tanto pronto. Cada una de estas consecuencias beneficia a Estados Unidos. Finalmente, la solicitud de crédito adicional incluye más de 30.000 millones de dólares para reabastecer las reservas de nuestras Fuerzas Armadas, sus arsenales, y para fortalecer la base industrial de Estados Unidos en muchos estados. Los fondos van a reabastecer los arsenales de Estados Unidos y van a ayudar a mejorar la capacidad de munición de alta demanda. Nada de esto son fondos que se van al extranjero. Son fondos que hacen más fuerte a Estados Unidos, modernizando nuestro arsenal de democracia aquí en nuestro país y mejorando el nivel de preparación de las Fuerzas Armadas de Estados Unidos para disuadir a cualquier adversario que trate de hacerle daño a los Estados Unidos. Los secretarios Blinken y Austin estamos ansiosos por escuchar sus comentarios al respecto. Antes de pasar a sus declaraciones iniciales, permítanme reiterar que queremos aprobar estas solicitudes, incluyendo los fondos adicionales para la defensa. Como dijera el exsecretario de Defensa Bob Gates, la acción más importante que puede tomar el Congreso para afianzar nuestra seguridad nacional es aprobar fondos para todo el año, para evitar el efecto que tiene la preparación militar cuando se producen secuestros o interrupciones temporales de fondos. Quisiera escuchar sus comentarios, secretario Austin, en su declaración inicial. Gracias, señora presidenta. Gracias, senadora Collins. Y antes de pasar a nuestros testigos, quisiera tomar un momento para darle la bienvenida a un nuevo miembro de nuestra comisión, la senadora Sinema, alguien quien realmente sabe cómo trabajar con miembros de ambos partidos. Sé que será una voz fuerte para nuestros representados. Y si me permite, señora presidenta, también le extiendo la bienvenida a la senadora Sinema. Hemos trabajado juntas en muchas cosas y sé que será algo muy importante para nuestra comisión. Me complace darle la bienvenida al secretario de Estado Antony Blinken y al secretario de Defensa Lloyd Austin. Gracias a ambos por tomarse el tiempo de comparecer ante nosotros y responder a preguntas. Vamos a comenzar con sus declaraciones iniciales. Secretario Blinken, comienzo con usted. Gracias, señora presidenta, señora vicepresidenta, distinguidos miembros de la Comisión de Asignaciones. Gracias por esta oportunidad de rendir testimonio ante ustedes. Reconozco que la gente tiene emociones fuertes sobre estos temas, pero les pido orden en la audiencia y que dejen que nuestros testigos puedan hablar. Secretario Blinken. Hace 2 años y medio, nuestros adversarios consideraron que Estados Unidos estaba dividiéndose internamente y se estaba alienando de nuestros aliados y socios en el mundo. Trabajando juntos hemos demostrado que la fortaleza de Estados Unidos y su liderazgo en el mundo siguen siendo algo sin igual. Hemos hecho inversiones históricas en Estados Unidos en aras de la democracia, nuestra infraestructura, nuestra competitividad tecnológica. Hemos invertido en la modernización de nuestras Fuerzas Armadas y en nuestro principal aliado estratégico, nuestra red de aliados y socios, que es más grande, más fuerte, más unida y capaz que nunca. Nosotros no estamos dando marcha atrás frente a la agresión de Rusia en Ucrania. Les pido nuevamente a los presentes que respeten la audiencia. La vamos a suspender hasta que se haya despejado el salón. Gracias, secretario Blinken, si puede continuar. Como decía, estamos defendiendo estos valores, no estamos dando marcha atrás, no ante la agresión de Rusia, la competencia estratégica en la región Indo-Pacífico en el mundo, no ante el terrorismo o quienes los auspician. Y Estados Unidos no está solo. Tenemos coaliciones extraordinarias con otros países. Nuestros adversarios y nuestros competidores reconocen que nuestras estrategias están dando resultado y siguen haciendo todo lo posible para interrumpirnos. Este es un momento en que muchos están apostando a que estamos demasiado divididos en el país para mantener el curso. Eso es lo que está en juego con esta solicitud de crédito adicional del presidente Biden. El presidente ha pedido los recursos urgentes necesarios para seguir estando a la vanguardia. El secretario Austin subraya la importancia de que estemos juntos aquí porque en esta misión, como en otras, para promover la seguridad nacional de Estados Unidos, tenemos que trabajar en la defensa y en la diplomacia hombro a hombro. Agradezco que la gente tenga opiniones firmes sobre estos temas. Les pido que respeten a nuestros testigos y permitan que el pueblo estadounidense escuche el testimonio de los testigos. Haremos una pausa. Puede continuar, secretario Blinken. El presidente ha planteado puntos fundamentales. Primero, apoyo para Ucrania y para Israel, dos democracias atacadas por quienes tratan de erradicarlas. Se ayuda a la defensa del pueblo de Israel, desarrollando nexos más estrechos con Estados Unidos después del ataque de Hamas. Nuevamente le pido a los miembros de la audiencia que respeten a los testigos y les permitan que continúen la audiencia. Gracias, secretario Blinken. Varios miembros de la comisión han viajado a Israel en las últimas semanas. He escuchado de autoridades israelíes sobre qué necesitan para evitar otro ataque como el que ocurrió. Y eso es lo que se contempla en este crédito adicional. Fondos para reforzar los sistemas de defensa de Israel. Igualmente se está pidiendo autoridad adicional para incrementar la seguridad para nuestra embajada. Como ha dejado en claro el presidente Biden desde el comienzo, Israel tiene el derecho y la obligación de defenderse. La forma en que lo hace cuenta. En nuestras conversaciones con el gobierno de Israel, el presidente y yo hemos subrayado la necesidad de que Israel puede continuar, secretario Blinken. El presidente y yo hemos destacado en nuestras conversaciones con el gobierno de Israel que es importante que Israel respete las normas de las acciones bélicas de acuerdo con las leyes humanitarias internacionales y que tome todas las medidas necesarias para evitar bajas civiles. En cuanto a Ucrania, el presidente Biden está pidiendo 60.000 millones de dólares para que Rusia no trate de aprovechar las brechas y para asegurar que Ucrania tenga la base económica de recuperación que requiere este esfuerzo militar. Tenemos que contrarrestar el daño causado por Rusia y tenemos que desarrollar nuevas industrias, infraestructura y cadenas de suministro conectadas con Europa y con el mundo. Tener energía limpia, reforzar la sociedad civil, los medios, para que tengan la fortaleza y puedan contrarrestar a Rusia. Ucrania necesita una economía fuerte y una democracia vibrante en sus fronteras. Desde la ofensiva de Rusia, el apoyo del Congreso le ha permitido al pueblo de Ucrania defender a su país, ayudando a asegurar que la invasión de Rusia no dé resultado. Gracias. Y antes de volver a usted, secretario Blinken, quiero agradecerle a la policía del Capitolio por su desempeño profesional. Continuando, desde que Rusia lanzó esta guerra, los fondos aprobados por el Congreso le han permitido al pueblo de Ucrania luchar para defender a su nación, también para asegurar que la invasión de Rusia resulte en una debacle, debilitando al país. Tenemos que defender los principios de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas de integridad territorial, independencia. Darle la espalda a estos esfuerzos tendría implicaciones perdurables para nuestra seguridad y nuestra posición en el mundo. Los conflictos en Ucrania y el Oriente Medio tienen nexos claros, como ustedes han destacado. Al recortar los medios tradicionales de Rusia de reabastecer a sus fuerzas armadas, han tenido que recurrir a China y a otras fuentes. Dejar que Rusia prevalezca con el apoyo de Irán simplemente alentaría tanto a Moscú como a Irán. Segundo, esto nos va a permitir enfrentar necesidades humanitarias urgentes, creadas por autócratas y terroristas y por conflictos y desastres naturales en Ucrania, Gaza, Armenia y otros lugares alrededor del mundo. Agua, alimentos, medicinas, otros elementos esenciales deben llegar a Gaza. Los civiles deben poder estar a buen resguardo, y esto se hace más difícil cuando Hamas está usando a civiles como escudos humanos. Hay que considerar la posibilidad de pausas humanitarias para evitar una crisis mayor, para defender nuestros principios más caros, incluyendo nuestra perspectiva de que todas las vidas humanas merecen asistencia. Sin esto, es muy probable que el conflicto se expanda. Habrá más sufrimiento y Hamas y sus patrocinantes se beneficiarían posicionándose como los salvadores de la crisis que ellos mismos han generado. Esto también es vital para la seguridad de Israel, para brindar asistencia a los civiles palestinos en este conflicto. Eso es algo imperativo. Hay otros socios en Gaza que tienen una visión diferente a la de Hamas y pueden hacerla realidad. Esto es crucial también para superar a nuestros rivales estratégicos. Esto va a ser un disuasivo, va a apoyar a nuestros aliados y socios en la región Indo-Pacífico que enfrentan amenazas crecientes y retos emergentes. Esto va a incrementar nuestra cooperación con nuestros aliados, con Australia, con el Reino Unido, el AUKUS, y también va a ayudarnos a tener equipo militar hecho en Estados Unidos. El plan del presidente también incluye recursos para el Fondo Monetario Internacional y el Banco Mundial para brindar alternativas a los préstamos coercitivos de China. Igualmente, ayudará a trabajar en seguridad alimentaria para los más vulnerables en el mundo. Esto va a generar casi 50.000 millones de dólares en fondos adicionales para el Banco Mundial y el Fondo Monetario Internacional. Un enorme beneficio, demostrando el liderazgo de Estados Unidos para enfrentar retos globales. Finalmente, esto hará inversiones cruciales para proteger la seguridad de los estadounidenses en el país. Esto incluye los retos hemisféricos de la migración irregular, para reforzar nuestra base de defensa, para que nuestras Fuerzas Armadas sigan preparadas y puedan tener la mejor fuerza militar del mundo, y para que podamos tener un arsenal de defensa de la democracia. Más de 50 millones se dedicarán a reabastecer los arsenales de Estados Unidos, reforzar nuestra base industrial y se utilizarán con negocios en Estados Unidos. Todo esto se hace conjuntamente para cumplir nuestra misión de tener un futuro más fuerte y brillante, donde Estados Unidos tenga una posición fuerte. Vamos a unirnos para mostrarle al mundo cómo podemos encarar este reto. Reconozco las pasiones demostradas en esta sala. Todos estamos comprometidos con la protección de las vidas civiles. Todos sabemos del sufrimiento que está teniendo lugar en este momento y estamos decididos todos a ver que esto termine, pero sabemos que es un imperativo el estar al lado de nuestros aliados y socios cuando su seguridad y sus democracias se ven amenazadas. Eso es lo que está ocurriendo ahora. Estamos decididos de su parte, igual que lo estamos con la defensa de civiles. Quisiera agradecerle a los senadores por su voto de hoy para enviar al embajador designado a Israel en un momento crucial. Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Gracias, secretario Blinken. Secretario Austin. Haremos una pausa mientras se despeja la sala. Secretario Austin, puede comenzar. Señora presidenta, señora vicepresidenta, damas y caballeros, buenos días. Gracias por la oportunidad de hablar de la necesidad urgente de fondos suplementarios para reforzar nuestra seguridad nacional. El 7 de octubre, terroristas de Hamas asesinaron a más de 1.400 israelíes y por lo menos 36 estadounidenses, tomando a más de 200 personas en rehenes. Fue el ataque más cruento en la historia de Israel. Fue algo cruel, repugnante y lleno de odio. Como ex jefe del Comando Central, esto me recordó los crímenes cometidos por ISIS en Irak y Siria. Como ha dicho el presidente Biden, cualquier democracia respondería de manera decisiva a un asalto de este tipo. Cuando viajé a Israel días después del ataque, destaqué el compromiso de Estados Unidos con la seguridad de Israel. Entendemos plenamente que Hamas no representa al pueblo palestino y deploramos la pérdida de vidas de civiles palestinos. Repetidamente le he destacado a líderes de Israel que proteger a los civiles de Gaza es una responsabilidad moral y un imperativo estratégico. Democracias como la nuestra son más seguras y más fuertes cuando respetamos las leyes de conflicto armado y protegemos a los civiles. Las tensiones siguen siendo altas, así que permítanme destacar las 4 líneas de acción del departamento. Primero, vamos a continuar protegiendo a las fuerzas de Estados Unidos y a nuestros ciudadanos en la región. Nuestras fuerzas han sido atacadas varias veces en los últimos días por milicias apoyadas por Irán. Estos ataques deben cesar. A instancias del presidente, las fuerzas de Estados Unidos han realizado ataques de precisión contra instalaciones en el oriente de Siria usados por Irán, por la Guardia Revolucionaria y sus afiliados. Si estos grupos siguen atacando a las fuerzas de Estados Unidos, no vamos a vacilar en tomar otras medidas necesarias para proteger a nuestra gente. Igualmente, hemos incrementado medidas de protección de nuestras fuerzas en la región y hemos movilizado una batería de defensa antiaérea y baterías Patriot. Igualmente, estamos enviando asistencia de seguridad a Israel. Estamos brindando capacidad de defensa antiaérea, munición de precisión, bombas compactas e interceptores para nuestros sistemas como el Iron Dome. También estamos coordinando con Israel para obtener la libertad de todos los hombres, mujeres y niños capturados por Hamas, incluyendo ciudadanos estadounidenses. Como el presidente Biden le dijo a los familiares de los estadounidenses secuestrados, no tenemos una prioridad más alta que la recuperación a salvo de sus seres queridos. Y de inmediato hemos ofrecido asesores militares para que ayuden a integrar la recuperación de los rehenes en las operaciones de Israel. También hemos reforzado nuestra postura en la región para disuadir a cualquier actor, estatal o no, de incrementar esta crisis más allá de Gaza. 2 fuerzas de tarea están en la región. La semana pasada se envió otro escuadrón de F-16 a la región para complementar otros escuadrones ya emplazados en el teatro de operaciones. Y todo esto subraya la advertencia del presidente. Ningún gobierno o grupo que le quiera hacer daño a Israel debe tratar de ampliar esta crisis. Sin embargo, a medida que aumenta nuestro apoyo a Israel, no perdemos el foco de Ucrania. Hace casi 20 meses, después de la fallida campaña de conquista de Putin, las fuerzas rusas se han visto severamente debilitadas. Las fuerzas ucranianas han recuperado más de la mitad del territorio tomado por Rusia desde febrero del 2022. Y esto ha sido posible gracias al liderazgo bipartidista de Estados Unidos, principalmente, y nuestra coalición de 50 aliados y socios. En Israel y en Ucrania, las democracias están enfrentándose a enemigos brutales que las quieren eliminar. No vamos a dejar que Hamas o Putin ganen. Estas luchas contra la agresión y el terrorismo definirán la seguridad global en los años por venir, y solo un firme liderazgo de Estados Unidos puede asegurar que estos tiranos y terroristas no se sientan envalentonados para más actos de agresión y atrocidades. Nuestras acciones presentes van a determinar el mundo que van a heredar nuestros hijos y nietos. Por eso presentamos una solicitud urgente de fondos para atender las necesidades de seguridad nacional de Estados Unidos, para invertir en nuestra base industrial. Estamos solicitando $10.600 millones para ayudar a Israel a defenderse. Igualmente estamos solicitando $44.500 millones para ayudar a Ucrania a defenderse de Rusia. Igualmente estamos solicitando fondos para atender las necesidades de Estados Unidos en el área de submarinos. Esto no solamente nos ayuda a enfrentar los retos urgentes del presente, también es una inversión en nuestra base industrial. Cuando enviamos municiones a nuestros aliados de nuestras reservas, tenemos que reabastecer nuestras reservas y esto fortalece nuestra preparación militar y estamos invirtiendo en empresas y trabajadores de Estados Unidos. Lo mismo se aplica a los fondos para Ucrania e Israel para obtener equipo moderno. Unos 50.000 millones de dólares de estos fondos irán a nuestra industria de defensa, generando empleos en más de 30 estados. Y esto también va a mejorar nuestra capacidad de producción de cara al futuro. Nos va a ayudar a asegurar que estemos preparados para enfrentar los retos de seguridad que se presenten en cualquier parte del mundo. Esto significará más prosperidad en el país y más seguridad en el mundo. Finalmente, quiero darles las gracias a todos ustedes por su liderazgo. Su apoyo bipartidista asegura que podemos defender a Estados Unidos y seguir al lado de nuestros aliados, magnificando nuestra fortaleza. Igualmente, quiero agradecerles por actuar para mantener a nuestro país seguro. El liderazgo de Estados Unidos, como dice el presidente Biden, es lo que une el mundo. Si no lo hacemos, los costos para Estados Unidos se van a incrementar. No le demos a nadie alguna razón para dudar de la determinación de Estados Unidos. Estoy ansioso por seguir trabajando con ustedes en aras de la seguridad y prosperidad de Estados Unidos. Gracias. Pasaremos ahora a rondas de preguntas con nuestros testigos y le pido a nuestros colegas que estén atentos al tiempo para mantenerse dentro de estos límites. Tenemos múltiples retos que tenemos que atender urgentemente, incluyendo el apoyo para Ucrania y las necesidades humanitarias urgentes. Algunos de mis colegas en la Cámara y algunos en el Senado quieren proceder solamente con la asistencia para Israel, separándola del resto de la solicitud del presidente. Los secretarios Blinken y Austin les pido que se refieran a este punto. ¿Por qué es tan importante que los fondos del crédito adicional cubran a Ucrania, la región Indo-Pacífica y la asistencia humanitaria, además de asistencia militar a Israel, secretario Blinken? Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Creo que es muy importante entender que los elementos de esta solicitud son parte de un paquete. Como usted sabe, la base industrial para la defensa es compleja. Es una unidad interdependiente. Estas inversiones de manera conjunta nos permitirán reforzar esta base industrial y derivar los beneficios de considerar esto en un conjunto y no como elementos separados. Igualmente, como saben, Irán y Rusia están trabajando en conjunción, tratando de presentarle un reto a nuestro liderazgo y comprometer nuestra seguridad y la de nuestros aliados. Han sido aliados en el devastador conflicto en Siria y han sido parte de los ataques en el norte de Israel y en Siria. El gobierno de Rusia está recibiendo a Hamas, están enviando materiales para atacar a civiles. Así que estamos viendo las conexiones aquí. Lo que ocurre en Ucrania, lo que ocurre en el Oriente Medio, también repercute en la región Indo-Pacífico. Más allá de Europa, sabemos que nuestros aliados y nuestros adversarios, nuestros competidores, están observando el conflicto, están observando nuestra respuesta. El impacto de esta guerra de agresión no provocada subraya la importancia de reforzar que la región Indo-Pacífico no se perjudique de estos conflictos. Así que lo que estamos solicitando es vital para tener una región segura en la cuenca Indo-Pacífico, tener respeto al orden internacional, incluyendo la libertad de navegación. En otras palabras, para nuestros adversarios, sean o no actores estatales, esta es toda una misma lucha y tenemos que responder de una manera que reconozca esto. Si comenzamos a desmembrar este paquete, nuestros adversarios verán qué estamos haciendo, ellos incrementarán su cooperación y esta será una mayor amenaza para nuestra seguridad y la de nuestros aliados y socios. Y un último punto, en cuanto a la asistencia humanitaria, y podemos volver a esto es vital, porque esto es lo que somos. Sabemos que en cada uno de estos conflictos hay gente que está sufriendo, hombres, mujeres y niños, padres, hermanos, hermanas, tías, tíos, abuelos. Y creo que es inherente a quienes somos el hacer todo lo posible para ayudarlos, para aliviarles la carga que tienen que llevar por verse atrapados en medio de un conflicto. Al mismo tiempo, es vital como proposición estratégica que brindemos la asistencia que podamos a la gente que la necesita. Vemos cómo Hamas y otros grupos están tratando de atraer gente a su causa. Tenemos que brindar una mejor respuesta en general. Y esa es parte de la propuesta estratégica y humanitaria. Gracias. Secretario Austin. Gracias, señora presidenta. Creo que es importante que recordemos que lo que sucede en Ucrania y lo que sucede en Israel es importante no solamente para Ucrania e Israel, también afecta a nuestra seguridad nacional. También debemos recordar que estos países están en medio de una lucha todos los días y su gente está muriendo todos los días. En Ucrania, Putin sigue atacando a civiles y cometiendo crímenes de guerra despreciables. Estos países necesitan urgentemente los recursos para que puedan continuar defendiendo su territorio soberano. En Ucrania, Putin pensaba que podía agotarnos, y esa es parte de su estrategia, fundamentalmente. Él piensa que Occidente se va a cansar de apoyar a Ucrania y que pronto se va a poder salir con la suya. Si no apoyamos a Ucrania y Putin gana, él no va a parar en Ucrania. Eso lo sabemos, todos lo sabemos. Así que creo que es importante hacer lo que sea necesario para apoyar a Ucrania, a Israel y para ayudarlos a defender su territorio soberano. Pero como dijera el secretario Blinken, esta es también una inversión en nuestra base industrial y de defensa. Esto nos va a ayudar a reabastecer nuestros arsenales y nos dará recursos adicionales para reforzar nuestra posición alrededor del mundo. Creo que esto es muy importante, que brindemos este apoyo en este momento en ambos casos. Gracias, señora presidenta. Y si me permiten, quisiera pedirle al secretario Blinken, quiero preguntarle, de los 10.000 millones de dólares para asistencia humanitaria, algunos colegas han dicho que esto puede terminar en malas manos, incluyendo Hamas. ¿Puede explicarle a la Comisión por qué solicitaron estos fondos y por qué piensan que esta asistencia no va a terminar en manos de terroristas? Muchas gracias. Primero que nada, tengamos claro en que estas son necesidades urgentes. Necesitan cosas urgentes, alimentos, medicinas, combustible, agua. Todo esto es cuestión de vida o muerte en Gaza, y sabemos que las reservas se están agotando. Los hospitales necesitan combustible para operar. Hombres, mujeres y niños se han visto desplazados en Gaza. Muchos están en este momento bajo protección de UNRWA y necesitan ayuda para sobrevivir. Desde el primer día hemos estado trabajando con el gobierno de Israel, con Egipto, con organismos de la ONU y otros sectores para asegurarnos que la asistencia llegue a la gente que la necesita y no caiga en manos de quienes no necesitan ayuda, como es la gente de Hamas. Hemos establecido un sistema mediante el cual la asistencia llega a través de Rafa. La asistencia se verifica de parte de Israel en un lugar establecido al efecto, así que cada camión que pasa está sometido a verificación por las autoridades de Israel y de Egipto. Los camiones pasan bajo supervisión de la ONU, llegan a centros de acopio en instalaciones establecidas y manejadas por la ONU. Los suministros salen de estos lugares a los distintos puntos, a hospitales, a panaderías y a otros puntos de destino. Durante este proceso tenemos la capacidad de darle seguimiento a la asistencia y podemos darle seguimiento contactando a los destinatarios para verificar que la ayuda llega a donde tiene que ir y no es desviada. Hasta la fecha no tenemos reportes ni de la ONU ni de Israel que indiquen que la asistencia pueda estar siendo desviada de su destino. Le puedo asegurar a usted y a esta comisión que el 100% de la asistencia llegará a su destino. No puedo. Siempre habrá algo que se pierde. Lo hemos visto y es algo predecible. Pero la gran mayoría de la asistencia está llegando a la gente que la necesita. Y tenemos más de 50 camiones diarios. La ONU y otros organismos están brindando asistencia y estamos enviando entre 500 y 800 camiones al día. Queremos llegar a 100 esta semana. Así que tenemos que trabajar, esto tenemos que hacerlo y pensamos que tenemos los mecanismos necesarios para que la asistencia llegue a quien la necesita y no jamás. Gracias. Vicepresidenta Collins, secretario Blinken, Israel está de acuerdo en que hay suficientes salvaguardas para proteger la asistencia humanitaria sin que se desvíe a Hamas, en lugar de llegar a los civiles inocentes que queremos ayudar. Sí, vicepresidenta, y en esto hemos trabajado estrechamente con Israel y otros aliados en la región. La asistencia está llegando de Egipto a Gaza y allí es verificada por los israelíes y los egipcios. Y como mencionaba, tenemos métodos de rastreo para que la ayuda llegue a donde tiene que llegar. Estamos en contacto prácticamente diario con Israel para que el proceso establecido funcione y para encontrar formas de ampliarlo. Un área en la que tenemos que hacer más es en el área del combustible porque los hospitales necesitan el combustible, las plantas desalinizadoras necesitan combustible. Así que estamos trabajando para encontrar la forma de atender estas necesidades con la garantía de que no se va a beneficiar a Hamas. Secretario Austin, como usted indicó en su declaración inicial, terroristas apoyados por Irán han lanzado numerosos ataques con drones y cohetes contra nuestras fuerzas de Estados Unidos, en Siria y en Irak. Según informes de prensa, ha habido por lo menos 20 de estos ataques y 19 militares estadounidenses han resultado heridos. Es imperativo que Irán y estos grupos comprendan que no pueden atacar fuerzas de Estados Unidos impunemente. Sé que la semana pasada el presidente Biden ordenó 2 ataques contra instalaciones en Siria utilizadas por aliados de Irán para amenazar a nuestras fuerzas. Pero el New York Times reportó este fin de semana que terroristas apoyados por Irán seguían atacando fuerzas estadounidenses en la región, aún después de estos ataques aéreos. Considerando que esto aparentemente no ha sido suficiente para disuadir ataques adicionales contra nuestras fuerzas por parte de elementos apoyados por Irán, ¿qué más está haciendo el departamento para frenar los ataques contra fuerzas estadounidenses? Vicepresidenta, permítame primero que nada enfatizar que la protección de nuestro personal militar y de los civiles es fundamental para mí y de suma importancia para el presidente también. Hemos tomado una serie de medidas para asegurarnos de reforzar la protección de nuestras fuerzas y hemos movilizado recursos a la región. El presidente ha sido muy claro y yo he sido muy claro, vicepresidenta, en que si esto no para, vamos a responder. Así que nos reservamos el derecho a responder, tenemos la capacidad para ello y responderemos en la forma y momento que consideremos oportuno. Secretario Blinken, Israel tiene el derecho a defender a sus ciudadanos de Hamas. incluyendo ir en pos de los terroristas en Gaza y destruirlos, tratando de minimizar las bajas civiles. Hay una distinción crucial aquí. Hamas atacó a los civiles. Han secuestrado a niños inocentes y a personas de hasta 85 años. Israel no está haciendo esto. Israel ha comenzado a responder en Gaza a los ataques salvajes e indiscriminados de Hamas. Algunos ciudadanos israelíes están pidiendo un cese al fuego. Un cese al fuego sería una victoria estratégica para Hamas. Le permitiría a Hamas ganar tiempo y prepararse para futuros ataques sin pagar las consecuencias por la mayor pérdida de vidas judías en un solo día desde el Holocausto. ¿Puede usted aclarar la posición del Ejecutivo sobre un cese al fuego? Primero que nada, senadora, concuerdo con usted en que ningún país puede tolerar algo como lo que sufrió Israel el 7 de octubre. Y es extraordinario cómo ese día se ha desvanecido de la memoria de muchos. Yo estuve en Israel poco después del ataque. He estado visitando Israel por más de 30 años y nunca había visto algo comparable en términos del impacto que esto ha tenido prácticamente en todos los individuos, hombres, mujeres y niños de Israel. No fue solamente el ataque y las vulnerabilidades que se pusieron en evidencia. El ver a gente joven perseguida en un festival, asesinados, niños ejecutados frente a sus hijos, asesinados frente a sus padres, familias quemadas vivas, gente decapitada, y pudiera continuar. Ustedes han visto las fotografías, los videos, han escuchado a testigos de estas atrocidades. Y nuevamente, a veces estas historias se olvidan rápido. En un kibutz, una familia que estaba desayunando, una ironía. Estos son ataques contra los kibutz, la gente que más fuertemente lucha por un futuro de paz. Una familia de 4 personas, 2 niños y sus padres estaban desayunando. Al padre le sacaron los ojos frente a sus hijos, le cortaron los pechos a la madre, amputaron los pies de uno de los niños, después los ejecutaron. Con eso es con lo que se está lidiando. Y ninguna nación puede tolerar semejante cosa. El presidente Biden ha atacado que Israel tiene no solo el derecho, sino la obligación de defenderse y de tomar todas las medidas pertinentes para que esto no se repita. También hemos sido claros en que es de importancia vital la forma en que actúa Israel y el imperativo de hacer todo lo posible para proteger a los civiles y para velar por aquellos afectados por el conflicto es algo que es muy importante para nosotros. Esto es importante especialmente para Israel porque de manera cínica y monstruosa jamás pone a civiles en posiciones de peligro usándolos como escudos humanos, colocando a sus efectivos, sus equipos y sus municiones, sus puestos de comando y sus arsenales debajo de hospitales, debajo de escuelas, en complejos residenciales. Pero para nosotros, y especialmente para las democracias, tenemos que hacer todo lo posible para asegurar que los civiles no se ven perjudicados y para velar por aquellos que requieren nuestra ayuda. En cuanto a un cese al fuego, en este momento usted tiene razón. Esto consolidaría lo que Hamas ha querido hacer y le permitiría a Hamas seguir donde están y potencialmente repetir sus acciones otro día. Y eso es intolerable. Nosotros pensamos que debemos considerar, por ejemplo, pausas humanitarias para que la asistencia llegue a los necesitados y se pueda proteger a la población. Pero no podemos tener una situación en la que se vuelva al status quo. Tener a Hamas haciéndose cargo del gobierno y la llamada seguridad de Gaza, porque la situación se repetiría y esto no lo puede tolerar ningún país. Senador Durbin, hace 6 semanas, el Senado, de manera bipartidista, se reunió con el presidente Zelensky. Fue un momento histórico. Se habló de la valentía del pueblo ucraniano, pero recuerdo un comentario del presidente Zelensky. Quisiera preguntarle al respecto. Le preguntaron acerca del futuro del conflicto y dijo que el heroísmo de su gente había quedado demostrado más de una vez, pero también dijo que sin la continuación del apoyo financiero de Estados Unidos y la OTAN, vamos a perder la guerra. Lo dijo claramente. Sin el apoyo financiero de Estados Unidos y la OTAN, perderemos la guerra. ¿Estaba exagerando, secretario Austin? No, senador. Como usted sabe, hemos brindado asistencia significativa para Ucrania, y no solo eso, con nuestro liderazgo y siguiendo nuestro ejemplo, otros 50 países están trabajando con nosotros en una coalición para brindar asistencia también. Han aportado 35.000 millones de dólares de sus propios fondos a este esfuerzo, y nuestro liderazgo en este sentido realmente cuenta. Secretario Blinken, ¿sabemos por qué estamos haciendo estas preguntas? El nuevo presidente de la Cámara de Representantes sugiere que él apoyaría los fondos para Israel, pero no los fondos para Ucrania. ¿Qué significaría eso? Si no siguiéramos apoyando a la gente de Ucrania en este momento. Senador, creo que eso sería algo terrible para nuestros valores y nuestros intereses. Para nuestros valores, porque todos creo que estamos unidos y queremos responderle a los agresores. Gente que está tratando de crear un sufrimiento enorme. ¿Cuál sería el impacto en la OTAN? Dos cosas. Primero que nada, estamos viendo una unidad sin precedentes en la OTAN. La OTAN se ha fortalecido y ha crecido. La alianza también ha respondido. Miembros individuales están ayudando a compartir la carga. En el pasado hemos tenido problemas que la carga no es pareja. Pero esta unidad desaparecería si nosotros nos replegamos. Estados Unidos ha aportado 75.000 millones de dólares, nuestros aliados y socios 90.000 millones de dólares. Estados Unidos ha aportado casi 22.000 millones de dólares en este tiempo, nuestros aliados y socios 49.000 millones. La asistencia humanitaria a Estados Unidos ha aportado 2.300 millones de dólares, los aliados más de 5.000 millones y otros 20.000 millones para atender a los refugiados que han ido a Europa. Creo que el mensaje que esto enviaría, primero que nada, a todas las partes, si Estados Unidos se repliega, dice, bueno, quizá nosotros deberíamos hacerlo también. Y segundo, para la alianza en sí. Debemos destacar que en esto estamos todos juntos, que esto no sea percibido como un abandono de nuestras responsabilidades. El secretario de Defensa ya ha dicho esto. No me cabe duda que si a Putin se le permite seguir actuando impunemente, no solamente no va a parar en Ucrania, sino que sería contra países de la OTAN. Esto sería algo que va a envalentonar a otros países en el mundo, y eso es algo que no es bueno para Estados Unidos. Nos conviene apoyar nuestros esfuerzos en este momento sin tener que pagar un precio más alto más adelante. Señor secretario, creo que no es coincidencia que Putin haya enviado al jefe de Hamas a Moscú días después del ataque del 7 de octubre. Una masacre terrible que usted ha descrito en detalle y de la que hemos escuchado tantas referencias. ¿Cree usted que el esfuerzo de los aliados... Putin está tratando de beneficiarse de las acciones de Hamas, esperando que esto nos distraiga, desvíe nuestra atención y que esto resulte en que Estados Unidos repliegue sus recursos y su apoyo al tiempo que él sigue causando estragos en Israel. Pensamos que todo esto está interconectado y por eso estamos haciendo una solicitud en conjunto. Gracias. Senador Brown. Gracias, secretario Blinken, por ayudarnos, los que estuvimos en Egipto, Israel y Arabia Saudita, para tratar de unir todo esto. Desde la perspectiva de Israel, no habrá un cese al fuego hasta que desaparezca la amenaza de Hamas para Israel. ¿Está usted de acuerdo con eso? Sí, señor. No cese al fuego hasta que Hamas deje de ser una amenaza. Tiene sentido para mí. ¿Cree usted que la meta de Hamas es destruir a Israel? Bueno, basta con escuchar lo que ha dicho Hamas. Secretario Austin. Sí, señor. Ellos no están tratando de ayudar a los palestinos, sino de matar a los judíos. Podemos decir que Hamas es una versión moderna de nazismo religioso. Podemos definirlo de múltiples maneras. La analogía más reciente es ISIS. ¿Podemos llamarlos nazis religiosos? Concuerdo con el secretario Blinken. Está bien, sí. Todos coincidimos con esto. ¿Piensan que jamás no podría hacer esto sin el apoyo de Irán? No me cabe duda. Algunas estimaciones dicen que el 93% del dinero que recibe jamás viene de Irán. ¿Es así? No sé el porcentaje exacto, pero le diría así que la mayoría viene de allí. Bueno, estos son reportes del gobierno mismo. Así que esta gente de Hamas, o nazis o como lo quieran llamar, quieren aniquilar a los judíos. Si yo fuera judío, trataría de pararlos. Tienen el apoyo de Irán. Nuestras fuerzas en Siria y en Irak están allí para protegernos de un repunte de ISIS. Así es. No es que están allí porque no tienen a dónde ir. Están allí porque tenemos un interés de seguridad nacional en que ISIS no regrese. ¿Está de acuerdo? Sí, señor. Hay una línea roja para que Irán no ataque a nuestras fuerzas o maten a estadounidenses en Siria o en Irak. Podemos decirle a los iraníes, por si es que nos están viendo, que si matan a un estadounidense, ellos o sus aliados en Siria o en Irak, vamos a ir en pos de ellos. ¿Puede usted decirlo? Creo que Irán debe responder por las actividades de estos elementos. ¿Consideraríamos ir a la raíz del problema? Podemos decir públicamente a las familias que tienen personal en Irak y en Siria que si tratan de matar a estadounidenses los vamos a atacar. Podemos decir eso. Lo que hemos dicho y seguiremos diciendo, senador, quisiera que fueran más claros porque les digo lo siguiente. Si uno de estos soldados pierde la vida, yo lo voy a decir y espero que otros se sumen. Si hay un ataque de Hezbollah en el norte, General Austin, ¿sería eso una escalada de la guerra? Sería una escalada. Israel se vería obligado a luchar en dos frentes. Coincido con eso y tienen misiles de alta precisión apuntados a Israel, correcto. También es correcto que Irán es el principal auspiciador de Hezbollah. Podemos decir que si abren un segundo frente o se activan a Hezbollah contra el Estado de Israel, iremos en pos de ellos. ¿Podemos decir eso? Si atacáramos o no a Irán por el tema de Hezbollah, eso requeriría el apoyo del Congreso. Espero que no se llegue a eso. ¿Coincide usted, secretario Blinken, que Irán quiere impedir la reconciliación entre Arabia Saudita e Israel? Sí. Los que se oponen a la normalización son Hamas, Hezbollah e Irán. Yo voy a hacer todo lo posible como republicano para ayudar al gobierno de Biden a lograr la reconciliación entre Arabia Saudita e Israel en el entendido que vamos a ayudar al pueblo palestino después de Hamas. Esta es la única salida, así que yo los felicito y los insto a seguir trabajando en aras de la paz entre Arabia Saudita e Israel. No dejen que Irán gane desviándonos. Y secretario Austin, lo admiro profundamente, pero tenemos que ser totalmente claros respecto a qué sucede si Irán matara a un soldado estadounidense o tratara de abrir un segundo frente. Y espero que les dejen saber dónde está la raya a no cruzar. Un punto que quisiera destacar respecto a nuestros colegas y sus propuestas es que no solamente no se están considerando los fondos para Ucrania, lo cual es un imperativo para Estados Unidos, también quieren quitarle fondos al servicio de rentas internas. Hace algunos días el Wall Street Journal reportaba que en 2021 los estadounidenses dejaron de pagar 688 mil millones de dólares en impuestos. Así que esto nos perjudicaría si no tenemos estos fondos para el servicio de rentas internas. Debemos tener esto en cuenta. Pero en cuanto al punto de agenda, se ha hablado de enviar recursos a Ucrania, secretario Austin. Usted es el secretario de Defensa, pero tiene una distinguida carrera militar. Si no enviáramos estos recursos, esto incrementaría la probabilidad de que algún día tengamos que enviar soldados a luchar en Europa. Absolutamente, senador Reid. Y como hemos dicho antes, si Putin tuviera éxito, no va a parar en Ucrania. Y los estados bálticos deberían pensar, seremos los próximos. No tengo duda que tarde o temprano habrá un intento de retar a la OTAN. Así que esto nos lleva a una disyuntiva entre darles los recursos para combatir o tener que ver en futuro estadounidenses combatiendo. Estoy de acuerdo, senador. Secretario Austin, usted ha mencionado con respecto a los esfuerzos en Gaza que la asistencia humanitaria no solamente es algo positivo, sino una necesidad estratégica para la operación de las fuerzas israelíes, ¿correcto? Absolutamente correcto. Me parece que ellos podrían y deberían posicionarse en las áreas que controlan y deberían hacer todo lo posible para ayudar a la gente a llegar a la zona donde está la asistencia. ¿Es esto apropiado? Absolutamente, senador, y yo hablé con mi contraparte, el ministro de Defensa, casi todos los días. Y cada vez que hablamos, le recuerdo la necesidad de que la asistencia humanitaria llegue a Gaza. Tuvimos una de esas conversaciones ayer y esto es realmente importante por múltiples razones. Pero me complace ver que se ha incrementado el suministro. Pero yendo al punto del secretario, tenemos que hacer más. En términos estratégicos, en cuanto a la percepción del mundo sobre Israel, Hay que dejar en claro que su enemigo es Hamas, no el pueblo palestino, y que están haciendo todo lo posible para proteger a los palestinos. No es solamente un impulso humanitario, sino una cuestión práctica y operacional. Estoy de acuerdo, señor. También, señor secretario, hemos querido destacar este punto y hemos sugerido que se pudiera apoyar la causa humanitaria y sería importante que las naciones del área contribuyan operacionalmente, pero la asistencia para el pueblo palestino debería venir de la comunidad internacional. Estoy de acuerdo, senador. Estados Unidos es el principal donante para los palestinos, 2.600 millones de dólares a través de múltiples entidades. Y quisiéramos que otros aliados y socios hicieran otro tanto. Hemos sido muy claros en este sentido en nuestras conversaciones y miembros de esta comisión y otros han ido a la región recientemente y han insistido en este punto también. Un último punto, se me está acabando el tiempo. También tenemos la necesidad de sacar a numerosos ciudadanos estadounidenses de Gaza. ¿Pueden asegurarnos que están haciendo todo lo posible con ese fin? Así es, senador, estamos trabajando en esto todos los días. Tenemos unos 400 ciudadanos estadounidenses y familiares, cerca de 1.000 personas atrapadas en Gaza que quieren salir. Todo mi departamento está trabajando en esto y estamos atentos y estamos trabajando para facilitar la salida de esta gente de Gaza. El escollo es Hamas. Tenemos que encontrar la manera de que puedan salir, obviando el bloqueo de Hamas. Estamos trabajando con intermediarios y hay casi 5.000 ciudadanos de otros países que también están tratando de salir. Esto es algo en lo que estamos muy concentrados. Hemos estado en comunicación con los estadounidenses en Gaza. Hemos tenido más de 5.500 comunicaciones por distintos medios para ponernos en contacto con esta gente, para guiarla y para ayudarles en su necesidad de salir. Senador Moran. Gracias, señora presidenta. El Congreso ha recibido esta solicitud del presidente. Mi primera solicitud fue ante esta comisión que tuviéramos esta audiencia y les agradezco por honrar esa petición. El Congreso tiene la responsabilidad constitucional de supervisar el uso que le damos a los fondos públicos y eso debe ser tratado de manera seria. Creo que esto es importante, pero yo indicaría que los cambios, que hay cambios que se requieren para que el paquete sea mejor y para incrementar las posibilidades de que sea aprobado. Me sigue decepcionando que el secretario mayor no esté con nosotros, pero me complace saber que vendrá la semana que viene. Quisiera que la comisión y nuestros testigos sepan que muchos pensamos que en nuestra frontera, en nuestros asuntos de seguridad nacional, la asistencia financiera, que deben ser parte de este proceso, pero también quiero que sepan que necesitamos que el Ejecutivo trabaje con nosotros en cambios de políticas y normas en la frontera, que se tenga personal adicional. Lo que se está haciendo no es suficiente, pero necesitamos un enfoque distinto frente a esta cantidad de gente que quiere ingresar a Estados Unidos. También quisiera que se promulgara un paquete de asistencia, pero hay muchos miembros del Congreso que toman muy en serio estos temas en la frontera. Quisiera hacerles un par de preguntas y otras las presentaré por escrito, pero quisiera tener una garantía un compromiso, secretario Austin. Quisiera asegurarme que cuando ayudamos a Ucrania, lo hacemos de forma tal que puedan tener éxito. No quiero que le apuntemos meramente a un impasse. Queremos que tengan la oportunidad y la capacidad y el personal de ganar. ¿Cuál sería su respuesta, secretario Austin? Mi respuesta, senador, es que exactamente eso es lo que estamos haciendo. Si nos remontamos al comienzo de este esfuerzo, todos estábamos diciendo que Ucrania no podría sobrevivir la ofensiva rusa por más de 2 días. Un año más tarde estamos aquí, no solamente han derrotado a Rusia en numerosas batallas, sino que han recuperado 50% del territorio que había ocupado Rusia. Y para Putin este es un fracaso estratégico. No ha logrado ninguno de sus objetivos, nunca conquistó a Kiev, él sigue atascado en el mismo punto. Creo que en base a dónde comenzaron y dónde estamos en este momento, yo le diría que los ucranianos han tenido progresos significativos y queremos asegurarnos de que puedan seguirlo haciendo. Hablamos con ellos todas las semanas para determinar cuáles son sus requerimientos y estamos actuando con sentido de urgencia. Secretario Austin, díganos, si puede, cómo la falta de asistencia a Ucrania envalentonaría a China, a Hamas, a Rusia. Hemos tenido circunstancias, incluso en la historia reciente, donde le hemos enviado un mensaje al mundo que no somos un aliado confiable y a nuestros enemigos y adversarios que no somos una amenaza. El no asistir a Ucrania en estas circunstancias caería dentro de esa categoría como una falta de parte nuestra. ¿Y cuáles serían las consecuencias de ese mensaje? Hay quienes dicen que deberíamos concentrarnos en otras áreas aparte de Ucrania, pero esto no crearía problemas enormes en otras partes del mundo y disminuiría el apoyo de nuestros aliados. Creo que sería un mensaje terrible para nuestros adversarios, senador. Nuestros adversarios quisieran desarrollar una narrativa que no somos aliados confiables. Y algo de eso ya se está notando en los medios. Están tratando de aprovechar cualquier oportunidad que se les presente y quieren demostrar que Estados Unidos es un aliado que no es confiable. Y creo que es necesario demostrar que vamos a seguir del lado de nuestros aliados. ¿Es coincidencia que todo esto esté ocurriendo al mismo tiempo? Creo que múltiples cosas se han conjugado aquí, pero ciertamente si no le damos seguimiento a esta situación y apoyamos a nuestros aliados y socios, estaríamos exacerbando algunos de estos problemas. Senador Tester, gracias a ambos por estar aquí. Les agradezco por el trabajo que hacen. Agradezco todo esto y quisiera referirme al crédito adicional para ayudar a Israel y Ucrania con asistencia humanitaria e infraestructura, especialmente para submarinos. Quisiera comenzar diciendo que el ataque perpetrado por Hamas el 7 de octubre contra Israel fue algo terrible y es crucial que le demos a nuestros aliados las herramientas necesarias para derrotar a Hamas. No podemos permitir que los enemigos de la democracia se impongan. Y por eso es crucial que esta comisión demuestre el liderazgo para que el Congreso pueda responder. Yo creo que Estados Unidos es el país más grande que haya existido en la faz de la Tierra y tenemos que apoyar a Israel, tenemos que hacerle frente a Rusia y creo que podemos hacer las dos cosas al mismo tiempo. Quiero ser muy claro, señor presidente, ante la comisión, que voy a estar trabajando con republicanos y demócratas y con nuestros colegas y debemos enviar un mensaje claro que no van a prevalecer. Mi pregunta es la siguiente. Secretario Austin, ¿puede usted hablarnos de el pedido suplementario para Ucrania, el crédito adicional? ¿Cuánto de esto servirá para reabastecer nuestra base industrial en el país? ¿Cuánto se invertirá en el país para reabastecer nuestra base industrial? Respecto a Ucrania, estamos pidiendo 44.500 millones de dólares para apoyar a Ucrania. 18.000 millones de ese dinero se van a dedicar a que podamos reabastecer nuestros arsenales. Vamos a adquirir armamento y municiones estadounidenses de empresas estadounidenses con ese fin. 12.000 millones serán para apoyar la iniciativa de asistencia a Ucrania. Esto es para adquirir nuevos productos, armas y municiones de empresas estadounidenses. 5.000 millones de esos fondos serán para apoyar a nuestras fuerzas actualmente emplazadas en el extranjero. Hemos visto numerosas brigadas que hemos enviado a Europa y tenemos que mantenerlas. Y 2.700 millones son para ampliar instalaciones, incrementar capacidad y acelerar la producción de munición crucial. Y finalmente, 1.000 millones para la adquisición de artículos cruciales de defensa, lo que incluye también munición. Así que este dinero va a revertir a la economía de los Estados Unidos. Esto va a generar empleos, va a sustentar empleos y nos va a dar oportunidades para los estadounidenses. Usted sabrá, senador, que en los primeros créditos adicionales que pedimos, recibimos apoyo bipartidista. Casi 27.000 millones de dólares de esos fondos se invirtieron en casi 30 estados del país. Eso es dinero tangible que revierte a los estadounidenses. Y el crédito adicional fortalecería a Estados Unidos, ¿correcto? Así es, senador. Hemos escuchado mucho de si Ucrania necesita o no ese dinero. Decían que ya no había la misma urgencia que en Israel. Creo que la urgencia existe en ambos casos. Si no aprobáramos el crédito adicional que incluye a Ucrania, ¿en cuánto tiempo Putin tendría éxito en Ucrania? Es difícil establecer un cronograma, senador, pero le puedo asegurar que sin nuestro respaldo, Putin tendría éxito. Los ucranianos han hecho una labor magnífica con ayuda nuestra, pero si les quitamos la alfombra de debajo de los pies, Putin se fortalecería y lograría su cometido de adueñarse del territorio soberano de sus vecinos. Quisiera reiterar que queremos hacer lo correcto y aprobar un crédito adicional que trabaje para nuestra seguridad nacional.
We need to support Israel, there's no question about it. They're fighting for their very existence. We see that. We need to help them and support them, not just in this package, but beyond that. I believe we also need to support Ukraine. When you look at history, we understand very clearly that tyrants like Putin don't stop. They have to be stopped. So we need to do those things, but we also need to secure the homeland. And that means securing our border. And there's about $14 billion, $13.6 billion in this package requested relative to the border and immigration. Secretary Blinken last month 270,000 illegal encounters, people trying to cross illegally at the southern border. That's a record. 2.5 million last year. And 169 individuals trying to cross that are on the terrorist watch list. Border security is national security, and I'm trying to understand how $14 billion to house, transport, and provide other services to individuals coming here illegally won't just encourage more to come. So my question to you is, how is it that you're going to assure us here today, and we'll ask Secretary Mayorkas in a week, that you're going to secure the southern border? Because I think for a lot of folks, when we're talking about national security, they want to see how that's going to happen. And we're going to want to be assured of that. How are you going to assure us that this is going to actually happen, that it's not $14 billion for more people to come here illegally?
Thank you, Senator. First, I think it's important to put this in very brief perspective, which is we are facing a migration challenge around the world of historic proportions. We've got more people on the move, displaced from their homes around the world than ever before, ever since we've been actually keeping the numbers on this. More than 100 million people in our own hemisphere. It's somewhere between 20 and 25 million people. And it used to be that we would have one crisis at a time. It might be Cuba, it might be Haiti. Now we've got Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, Ecuador, Colombia, and so on down the list, Nicaragua. And then people coming to our hemisphere from outside the hemisphere trying to get into the United States. My piece of this, our piece of this at the State Department, is the work that we're doing with countries throughout our hemisphere for them to step up and take shared responsibility for this problem. And that means, among many other things, making sure that they themselves have asylum systems that work so that people will stay.
With all due respect, Secretary, we understand that. How are you going to assure us that you are going to stop the flow of illegal crossings at our southern border? Will you give us that assurance, and will you quantify it?
We are working comprehensively.
Without just talking about the problem, will you give us the assurance, and will you quantify it?
I would certainly defer to my colleagues at DHS and others who are working on the border itself. The piece that I'm focused on is working with other countries in the region.
Is it your opinion we should enforce third safe countries? I'm sorry,
go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, my time's limited here. Should we enforce third safe country and remain in Mexico protocols?
We should work with other countries and enforce every reasonable measure to make sure that the migratory flow is safe, orderly, and humane. That's what we're working on.
Secretary Austin, we've had more than 25 attacks in the Middle East on our troops just since October 7th. Why are we not striking back more forcefully? Why are we not delivering a resounding message to stop those strikes on our bases and on our troops?
Thanks, Senator. As I said, the protection of our troops, the safety of our troops is very, very important to me and the President. And we maintain the right to respond at a place and time of our choosing. And we've said that, and we're serious about that.
So we're to understand that we will strike back sufficiently forcefully to stop these attacks.
We will do what's necessary to protect our troops and deter this kind of behavior.
One follow-up question. Senator Moran asked about a strategy with Ukraine that brings this war to a successful conclusion. What is that strategy?
Well, from our standpoint, we want to make sure that Ukraine, at the end of the day, is a democratic, independent, sovereign country that can defend its territory and deter aggression. We also want to make sure that we keep NATO together, and I think the team has done a credible job in making sure that we bring our allies and partners along. In terms of specific goals and objectives, I would defer to the Ukrainian leadership to define that. But again, our goal is to make sure that we're providing the support to Ukraine to do what it needs to defend its territory.
Thank you. We need to know that we have a strategy as part of this funding. I think it's very important in terms of building support for the funding for Ukraine. Thank you to you both. I appreciate it.
Senator Shaheen. Thank you, Madam Chair and Vice Chair, for this hearing, and thank you to Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin for being here at this really critical time throughout the world. Senator Graham and Senator Moran, to some extent, both made the case for Hamas, for Iran funding Hamas and Iran's malign activities across the Middle East. But can you also talk about why funding Ukraine aid is important to degrade Iran's activities as well? So, Secretary Austin or Blinken?
Well, as you know, Senator, we've seen Iran provide munitions and drones to Russia, and Russia's used those capabilities to attack the Ukrainian infrastructure, attack civilians in towns and villages across the land. And so I think, making sure that we're dialing back some of the capability, they're connected, so I think it'll have an impact on what Iran is doing for Russia as well. So.
And Senator, I would only add that it's a two-way street. It's both the assistance that Iran is providing to Russia for use in Ukraine to further its aggression, but it's also increasingly technology that Russia is providing to Iran to make its own inventory more sophisticated that could and will almost certainly be used either against Israel or, for that matter, potentially against us, against our forces, against our personnel, either directly or via Iranian proxies that are in the region. So this relationship, this two-way relationship, is one of increasing concern to us, and one that we have to be acting against resolutely in both theaters, because they're closely linked.
I agree. I think it's very important for us to remind people that degrading Iran and their capabilities means not just supporting Israel, but it means supporting Ukraine as well. Last week, I chaired a hearing of the European Subcommittee on the Black Sea security. I think one of the things we've learned from this war in Ukraine is how important the Black Sea region is to so much of the world, and the fact that Ukraine actually, literally, Ukraine's grain exports literally feed the world. So can you speak to the interconnectedness between the world's food security and Russia's war against Ukraine, and why that's very important, and what's going to happen if we aren't able to continue to open up those grain corridors and provide the food that so many desperate nations and peoples need?
Senator, one of the many terrible consequences of Russia's aggression against Ukraine is the impact that it's had far and wide, well beyond Ukraine, well beyond Europe, on people around the world, no more so than when it comes to food security. We all know that Ukraine has been the, or certainly one of the breadbaskets of the world. Its export of wheat, of grain, of other food products is essential to people in Africa, many other continents, both in terms of the supply of food and also the price of food. And in interrupting, in stopping the export of foods and food products from Ukraine, particularly through the Black Sea, Russia's had a devastating impact on food security for people around the world. This never should have been necessary in the first place, the Black Sea Grain Initiative, because Russia never should have invaded Ukraine, and then once it did, it never should have blockaded Ukraine's ports and prevented it from exporting. But an arrangement was made, as you know very well, led by the United Nations and Turkey, to get an arrangement by which these products could be exported. And while that agreement was in force, while the Russians were respecting it, allowing it to go forward, some 30 million metric tons of wheat and grain were exported, the equivalent of 18 billion loaves of bread. So that's what was at stake. That's what's been now stopped by Russia refusing to allow that initiative to go forward. So we've been working with the Ukrainians, Europeans have been working with the Ukrainians to find other ways of getting these products out of Ukraine and to world markets, but nothing fully substitutes for the Black Sea. It's why you're so right to focus on it. And by the way, last thing I'll say is we have, as a result of a lot of good work that's been done and very good input from you and from others, a refined Black Sea strategy that we're also sharing with our allies and partners. I think this will be an important subject at the next NATO summit that we'll be hosting here in Washington.
Thank you. And I'm almost out of time, but I do want to ask you about the the suggestion that's being floated that humanitarian aid is going to go through the UN, and the UN is going to take some funding off of that in ways that support the UN and don't support the end goal of that aid. So can you just point out why that is not correct?
First of all, that's just quite literally and practically not the way it works. The Security Council is not involved in these either the decisions about how the aid is used or distributed. It's individual UN agencies. Some of the critical UN agencies that are involved in providing assistance, like UNICEF, like the International Organization for Migration, like the World Food Program, happen to be led right now by Americans. In fact, 3 American women. And so we have great confidence in the ability of these agencies to do the critical work that they need to do, and to do it in a way that makes sure the assistance they're providing gets to the folks who need it, not folks who don't need it.
Thank you.
Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here. And I'd like to talk a little bit about what I think is really the underpinning of our own defense security and our ability to provide aid to others, aid to our department, and that's our procurement ability. It's not glamorous, but it really is so very important. I've learned a lot about it through working with Senator Murray on our military construction efforts, but also Camden, Arkansas is a major player in that space, and they're working really hard. The people of Arkansas, the people of Camden have really stepped up. Secretary Austin, 2 years ago in the fiscal year 23 DOD budget hearing, I asked you about possible ways we could strengthen our industrial base to ensure we meet the current day demands and replenish our stockpiles. Since then, from your perspective, how has industry responded? How is it performing? Are we making the right adjustments and doing so fast enough?
Well, thanks, Senator. I'll begin by saying that I'm committed to continuing to do the right things to make sure that we're working with industry to expand capacity where appropriate. We engaged in industry early on as this conflict in Ukraine started, and for the most part, well, in all cases, leaders of industry were very helpful, very willing to increase production, increase capacity, and so we have some good examples of that great work. In terms of whether or not it's fast enough, if you're me, it can never be fast enough. If you're, Ukrainian, you can never get it there fast enough. But there are some limitations in terms of how quickly they can do certain things. There will continue to be workforce challenges, and when you expand capacity, there's this issue of the time that it takes to build the capacity and then make sure that the lines are running smoothly. Now, what they've done in a lot of cases to meet urgent needs is double and triple shifts so that they can, in some cases, crank out munitions and weapons at a much greater speed. So the cooperation that we have enjoyed throughout, I think, has been really good. And we are in contact with industry leadership nearly daily. And my under for acquisition and sustainment is engaging on a daily basis, and I meet with them frequently. So they are doing the right things. They're being very helpful, but it can never move fast enough, to answer your question.
So with all the global demand now, and then the possibilities of looking into the future, with such an uncertain world, we have this global demand for short-range rocket motors, PAC-3 missiles, HIMARS, Javelins, Stingers, 155 military artillery rounds. Do you feel that the request replenishes current stockpiles to an appropriate level while simultaneously fulfilling current day demands? Do you feel industry is able to meet the higher request if needed?
I do. I think what we have in this request is the right amount. and I would say that we're going after capability as fast as industry can produce it. And so we've asked you for $3 billion as a part of this request to invest in helping to expand that capacity with industry. But it's a thing that we need to continue to work.
So regarding the Israel portion of the supplemental related to the Iron Dome request, the language is structured as a transfer to Israel. I'm hearing from industry that they are currently lacking the investment to help quickly accelerate rocket motor production for the interceptor missile to meet the new increased demand. The Ukraine portion of the request includes language allowing appropriated dollars to support infrastructure investments to accelerate production. Should we include similar language to support infrastructure investments to help meet the interceptor missile demands?
Senator, as a general rule, we're going to do everything that we can to meet the demands that we see in both Ukraine and Israel. As you know, this is the munition that you're addressing is a co-produced munition,
Right.
And so the American company that produces that munition is a company that I once worked for. So I'll have to take that question for the record rather than answer.
I don't have time to address the question, but as ranking member on agriculture, I'm concerned about Russia using food as a weapon. So that's for what it's worth.
Very much share that concern.
Senator Merkley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to both of you. Secretary Blinken, in your testimony, you talked about the worsening humanitarian catastrophe and how the humanitarian challenges are relevant to our deeply held principles that every civilian life is equally worthy of protection and that a failure on humanitarian relief could make conflict more likely to spread. I was heartened to hear that Israel has agreed to facilitate getting 100 trucks a day of aid in. But senior UN and humanitarian agencies, senior personnel both, have said that Rafah crossing is not equipped for that type of logistical operation, and that the place where the 500 trucks before came was primarily through Karim Shalom, which is also on the border with Egypt, but it's set up to facilitate large amounts of trucks getting through. Are we pushing to really for Israel to solve the logistic problem so we can actually get, and 100 trucks really it's 1/5 of what was supplying Gaza before, so that's really just the ultimate minimum, but much more is needed. Are we pushing to have Israel solve those logistical problems quickly to get that humanitarian relief in?
Thank you, Senator. We're looking at every means possible to get assistance into Gaza. I think one of the challenges we have is, while we fully agree that even 100 trucks, and we're still not there, and we want to get there as quickly as possible, is not going to fully meet the needs. There's also an absorptive capacity problem on the Gaza side, given the conflict, given the horrific disruptions that we're seeing. So even if you could get trucks well above 100 going in, you need to have on the receiving end, the capacity to actually both take and distribute that assistance. That's also lacking. So we've got to work on that too.
Right, that too. But are we pushing I'm just looking for yes or no to use the additional logistical capacity that is at Karim Shalom?
Right now, our focus is on maximizing what we can do through Rafah, but even as we're doing that, we'll look at other ways to get assistance in.
Thank you. I'm very concerned on the testimony of other experts that that's going to be very hard, and the moment is like right now, hunger rising, thirst rising, the potential for disease and conversations with the Red Cross and others huge because of the contaminated water, possibility of cholera, et cetera. I want to turn to an article by Thomas Friedman on October 19th. He said, if Israel rushes headlong into Gaza to destroy Hamas and does so without expressing a commitment to seek a two-state solution with the Palestinian Authority and end Jewish settlements deep in the West Bank, will be marking a grave mistake that will be devastating for Israeli interests and for American interests. And he notes that the impacts include fanning the flames on the West Bank, a risk of a broader war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, eliminating the possibility of any coalition governing Gaza after all this passes, including whether it's Palestinian, Arab League, UN, NATO, so forth, and destroying the probability of normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That's quite a set of American interests. Do you share Thomas Friedman's concern that without a vision of a two-state solution to address the prosperity and thriving and Palestinian aspirations, that we're locked into hostilities that will haunt us forever?
It's been the policy of this administration from day one to support and try to put in place the conditions to actually get to a two-state solution. We believe that is the only way to truly ensure Israel's security as a Jewish and democratic state and to give Palestinians the state to which they're entitled. So we believe that that's essential. At the same time, we've been working very hard to both deepen and expand the process of normalization between Israel and its neighbors, both far and wide. And these things
Thank you. I
not
want to
only
slip in
are...
one more question. I support the two-state solution, but I think
Please, go ahead.
the facts on the ground are making it more and more difficult, and I agree with Friedman's analysis that policy has to change around settlements in order for that to be a possibility. I want to close with a question related to getting the Americans out, the families who are there. I have an Oregon family. They relayed to me how they'd 3 times gotten a text message, email saying, drop everything, go to the Rafah crossing. They waited until dark each time, nothing happened. They weren't interfered with by Hamas, just the gate never opened. NBC has reported on another family in Massachusetts, the Medway family, very, very almost parallel experience. Why can't, with the trucks coming in, why can't at the same time we get those families, those American families who are lined up at the gate, having received notices from the United States to do so, why can't we get them out that gate?
Senator, as I mentioned earlier, this is something we're working on every single day. We want to get our fellow citizens out, and we're trying to find the way to do that. To date, the impediment has been Hamas, and I regret very much that we've had occasions where we thought that we would be able to move forward, which is one of the reasons we were in contact with people and suggested that they get in place to do that, only to find that the necessary procedures that had to be put in place to actually make that work couldn't go forward, and Hamas has been the impediment to that. We continue to work on it. We're working on it with Egypt. We're working on it with Israel. We're looking for ways to get people out. But because Hamas controls what goes on, for the most part, inside of Gaza, unless it agrees, then it's going to be very difficult to get that done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Moore Capito.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here today. I think this is a very important hearing. I want to thank the chair and vice chair for the hearing. I remain an adamant supporter of our allies in Israel and believe that we should continue to back Ukraine against Russian aggression. You both made that point very clear. But I do believe that you've also made clear the point and emphasized how intertwined Ukraine and Israel are important to our own national security. But in your own statement, Secretary Blinken, in your statement, you mentioned one little throwaway line here when you say that includes addressing the hemispheric challenge of irregular migration. I am assuming you're talking about our southern border here. As been reiterated, 269,000 last month, over 200 on the terror watch list. Americans are right to be extremely concerned about what's happening here and how it's intertwined with everything that's happening globally. And we can't lose sight of what we see. I am sure you, particularly Secretary Blinken, when you see the news of the anti-Semitic rallies that are occurring in our own country and across the globe, it's something I didn't think we would ever see in our lifetime. And it's earth-shattering. So can you will you please make a better case of why our own homeland security here, including our southern border, is figuring into the equations that you've brought us here today to talk about?
Thank you very much, Senator, and I appreciate as well your reference to the, as you said, almost unimaginable instances of anti-Semitism that we've seen, as well, by the way, as expressions of Islamophobia and other bigotry that unfortunately horrifically surfaces, particularly in times like these. With regard to migration, as I mentioned earlier, we have a genuinely historic challenge. We have a historic challenge in our own hemisphere with nearly 25 million people on the move. What we're working to do from the perspective of the State Department is to work closely with other countries to get them to assume their share of responsibility in dealing with this migration. And that means, and
With
it's
all
in the
due
budget.
respect, it's not working.
This
It's
is
not working.
This is, as I said, a problem of truly historic proportions, requires a comprehensive effort that we're making. It also requires a lot of things, including comprehensive immigration reform. The very first piece of legislation the President put before Congress would have done that. Unfortunately, it hasn't been addressed.
Here's
in
what
the
I'm
last 3 years.
concerned about, and I think a lot when you see the 200 from the terrorist list. I know we're all concerned about this, that seeds of foment of terrorism could grow in all of, as you see the sort of seeds of unrest in our own country, as we're watching Ukraine and we're watching Israel. We don't want to take the eye off the ball of what's actually happening here. And I'm sure that nobody here wants to see that. I am concerned. I would like to go to another question for Secretary Austin. Much like my fellow senator from Arkansas, we do manufacture a lot of the munitions at Allegheny Ballistics Laboratory in West Virginia, where we have over 1,600 people working there. And this supplemental does help build up that industrial base and industrial production at that facility and other facilities across the country. I guess when we see where we are now, would you say that we've learned a lot about our munition requirements because of what's happened in Ukraine? Or would you say that these were issues that had been, I guess, focused on at the Department of Defense, but we hadn't really realized where we were until we have to replenish everything that we've given away or sold, and to be able to get our own capacity up to where we want it to be?
Okay, thanks, Senator. I want to be clear about the fact that we have maintained and will continue to maintain adequate capability to protect our interests and defend this country. And so as we have drawn down some of our stocks to provide capability to others, it's important to replenish that so that we continue to maintain agility and depth so that we can respond to crisis like we've seen. But our ability to protect ourselves and protect our interests, we will never mortgage that. And we go through a process every week as we receive requests for assistance, and we measure what's being requested against what's required for our defense, and we make the right calls. In Ukraine's case, there are some 50 countries, as you know, that are working with us to provide security assistance. Israel, their fight's a different fight, and their requirements are a bit different, and so, you know, they're using different types of things. So we're able to meet both requirements, and so again, there is an urgent need to get the supplemental so that we can continue to do the things that you mentioned in terms of replenishing those stocks that give us that flexibility going forward.
Thank you.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Vice Chair Collins, and I'll thank the chair in your absence and our two important witnesses today. Thank you for your timely and critical leadership in this hinge point in our role in the world and in human history. It is critical that we meet this moment and provide the full supplemental request presented to Congress by our president. We have to sustain U.S. global leadership, and I would argue it is directly in our national security interests for us to stand up to tyrants and terrorists while meeting humanitarian needs to help stabilize critically impacted communities. The conflicts in Israel and in Ukraine are regional in nature, but they have global consequences. As the world questions whether the United States is a reliable, trustworthy ally, we have to fund our sustained presence in these fights. We have to see the global impact of a conflict like Ukraine that is having on global food security. We have to recognize we can't just respond to Russian aggression in Europe while Russian proxies are spreading instability around the world in places like Africa. And addressing just the humanitarian needs in the Middle East by cutting responses in this hemisphere is not in our interests. We have to address these challenges comprehensively. Secretary Blinken, If I could, I just briefly want to ask you, humanitarian relief has long been bipartisan. There are some who are questioning whether we are spending too much, whether we are preventing diversion to terrorists. You've addressed that previously. I've been reassured to hear directly from Israeli representatives. They value humanitarian relief in the middle of this conflict. You're only asking for us to sustain our current year funding going forward, and it will provide humanitarian relief across dozens of countries around the world that are facing threats of instability. Could you speak to the strategic value of our continued humanitarian relief leadership?
Thank you very much, Senator, and I appreciate the fact you've underscored that what we're looking at is to sustain what we've already been doing, and also making the point that, yes, this would be vital for Ukraine, it would be vital for people in Gaza, but also this would cover situations that we have to address in Sudan, in Afghanistan, Nagorno-Karabakh, and other places. And I think, again, there are two things that are at stake here. One is, and I always lead with this because I think this really is who we are, is the imperative that America continue to be seen as the country that stands with those who desperately need assistance at the most critical time. And this goes to, I think, an impulse that most Americans feel to help. But it's also a critical strategic proposition. I'll give you one example. It's imperative that Hamas be defeated. And it's imperative that Hamas no longer pose the threat that it's posed so acutely to Israel. But there's military defeat. There's also ideological defeat. You can't kill an idea, no matter how perverted and distorted it is. You have to be able to offer a better alternative to people who are in desperate straits. Our ability, our willingness to be leading the effort to help them deal with the acute challenges they face in their lives, as well as offering a genuine vision for how life can be better, is a vital strategic interest of ours.
Another key piece of this support package, if I might, Mr. Secretary, is the non-lethal support to Ukraine.
That's right.
We are providing a significant amount, although our European partners are providing dramatically more. We're not just sending weapons, we're sustaining Ukraine's ability to have a robust economy and government. How critical to Ukraine's sustained war effort and to Ukraine's independence is this ongoing non-lethal budget support? I'd be interested in hearing a brief response from both witnesses.
It's essential. It is essential to Ukraine's success, and here's why. Russia's doing two things. It's trying to go at Ukraine on the battlefield, and as you've heard the Secretary say, Ukraine's had remarkable success, again, thanks to so much support from Congress over the last year and a half in getting back 50% of the territory seized from it. And of course, there's an ongoing intense battle now in the east and the south. But Russia's also going at what it sees as the soft underbelly of Ukraine, and that is its electric grids, its ability to produce and export food, its basic infrastructure. This is another way by which basically Putin hopes to sap the will and defeat Ukraine. The assistance that we're providing to make sure that it can secure and provide energy for its own people, that it can sustain its agricultural system, that it can sustain its economy and grow its economy to the point where it's got a rising tax base, it can pay increasingly for its own defense and deterrence. Those are absolutely essential to making sure that it succeeds in this war effort.
I'll summarize, if I might, Secretary. If we only send weapons to Ukraine, but we fail to support their government and their economy, they will lose to Putin's aggression nonetheless. Is that correct, Mr. Secretary?
I absolutely agree, Senator.
Closing quick point, there's $2 billion in this request for support for the Treasury Department to work with the IMF and the World Bank. It would unlock $50 billion in support. I hope my colleagues will look closely at the ways that that would allow us to support critical allies like Egypt and Jordan, as well as other countries around the region and world that are facing instability because of the war in Ukraine. Thank you, and thank you for the chance to be with you.
Senator Kennedy.
Secretary Austin, is it not true that the world is on fire in Ukraine, the world is on fire in the Middle East, and that there are embers smoldering in the Indo-Pacific?
I would say that clearly there are challenges in both the places that you mentioned. And of course, in the Indo-Pacific, we see a China that's increasingly aggressive.
Do you disagree with my statement?
That the world is on fire? I would describe it a bit differently. I agree with your premise that it's as challenging as we've seen.
Is it not true? Sorry to cut you off, but we only have limited time. Is it not true that China, Russia, and Iran have worked between and among themselves to either start those fires, encourage those fires, or create those embers?
I would say that we see evidence of them growing closer together since the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I didn't see evidence of China collaborating with Russia to cause them to launch their invasion on its neighbor.
Is it not true that China, Russia, and Iran would like to see Russia dominate Central and Eastern Europe?
I think China would like to see the United States be unsuccessful. They would like to see Russia continue to challenge us and keep us, focused on that area, so that we have less time and energy and resources to focus.
Well, the situation I just described, I appreciate you parsing your words, but the situation I just described would not disappoint China, Russia, or Iran, would it?
I'm certain that it wouldn't.
Okay. Is it not true that China, Russia, and Iran would like to see Iran dominate the Middle East?
I certainly believe that Iran would like to see Iran dominate the Middle East.
Do you think that would break China's heart or Russia's heart to see Iran dominate the Middle East?
I don't think Russia or China would be unhappy about that, but...
Is it not true that China, Iran, and Russia would like to see China dominate the Indo-Pacific and be free to make moves in sub-Saharan Africa and South America? Is that not true?
I think that is certainly China's goal, to be the dominant player in the Indo-Pacific.
And that is not a world safe for democracy, is it?
It is not. It's one that would be controlled by autocrats eventually if they were to dominate the Indo-Pacific, and if Iran dominated activities in the Middle East.
And if we did not stop them, strike that. Do you believe that weakness invites the wolves?
I do. I think deterrence. In order to deter, you have to show strength.
And if we do not meet these challenges now, do you believe it will be more expensive in terms of America blood and treasure to meet them later?
I do. I do, Senator.
All right, I've got one last question. Mr. Secretary, I'm looking at your and the President's proposed supplemental. What does $16 billion for child care, $6.5 billion for the Federal Communications Commission to extend high-speed internet, and $3.1 billion for the FCC to reimburse telecommunication companies to replace insecure equipment have to do with the world challenges we're facing right now? And why did you make this request?
I would defer to other colleagues on those specific aspects of the budget request.
Do you support those?
I support the supplemental budget request.
Okay. Last question. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your candid answers, but why did the Department of Defense oppose my bill calling for a special inspector general in Ukraine so we could follow every penny of American taxpayer money, given the fact that the Inspector General of the Department of Defense has never been able to audit his own department?
The Inspector General of DOD has been involved in this effort from the very beginning.
Oh, I know, believe me. He opposed my bill. And I find that ironic because the Department of Defense is the only federal agency that has never, in the history of ever, been audited. But your Inspector General insisted that he be in charge. Do you not see the irony there with respect to Ukraine?
Senator, I'm confident our Inspector General will do a great job in making sure that we remain on track with our responsibilities in Ukraine, and Europe.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Chair and Vice Chair. Thank you, Secretaries, for being here. I don't think there's anyone on this dais who would disagree that we are in a fight against global fascism and that what happened in Israel is Israel's 9/11. It causes anguish, it causes outrage, and hopefully we can achieve some collective moral clarity about moving forward. But Secretary Austin, I want to ask you about the post-9/11 period in the United States. It seems to me that that collective anguish and outrage and moral clarity converted itself into some bad strategic decisions that we are still dealing with in the region. And so my question for you is, what kind of strategic advice are you giving to your Israeli counterparts about avoiding the mistakes that we made in the past?
Thanks, Senator. Great question. And I have had those conversations with my counterpart. And my advice to him was to be thoughtful about actions and objectives and what they were trying to accomplish, and really think that through, because if you don't, then the consequences can be long lasting. And so we shared that with them on a number of occasions, and hopefully that has made a difference.
Do you think Israel has completed its strategic deliberations about what comes next?
I don't know for sure, Senator Schatz, if they have. Because I'm not privy to their internal cabinet discussions. But I certainly would say that from the very beginning, I have encouraged them to think about, what this looks like at the end of the day, what this transitions to, and really to begin to think through many of the things that Secretary Blinken mentioned earlier, because I think that's really important. If you don't do things to address the underlying causes of instability, then you create a bigger problem, or you have a lasting problem that will just go on forever and ever.
Secretary Blinken, let's do a thought experiment. Hamas, at some point in the future, is disabled. I think eliminating it's a rhetorical flourish that puts us in a position where we will never stop fighting against some offshoot, some first cousin of Hamas, some place on the planet. So let's stipulate that the objective is to disable them to the point where they cannot pose a threat. Who runs Gaza?
Well, I think we have two shoals, if you will. One is we can't have a reversion of the status quo with Hamas running Gaza. We also can't have, and the Israelis start with this proposition themselves, Israel running or controlling Gaza. That's not their intent. It's what they want to do, and it's not something that would be supported. So in between those shoals are a variety of possible permutations that we're looking at very closely now, as are other countries. At
So
some
can I
point,
just-
let me be more precise.
Sure.
At some point, what would make the most sense would be for a effective and revitalized Palestinian Authority to have governance and ultimately security responsibility for Gaza. Whether you can get there in one step is a big question that we have to look at. And if you can't, then there are other temporary arrangements that may involve a number of other countries in the region. It may involve international agencies that would help provide for both security and governance. Ultimately, though, beyond that is what we come back to, what this administration believes, which is the imperative of getting to two states for two peoples. That's where you finally get the kind of sustained security that a Jewish and democratic state of Israel needs and must have, and you also get the state that the Palestinians are entitled to.
I think you're both being very thoughtful about this. I want to say that. But I think the worry that I have, and I've heard it bouncing around the halls of the Capitol, is that when we ask about what the end state is, what I've heard is, well, we didn't ask what the end state was in World War II. We just went ahead and fought the bad guys and let us sort it out later. I'm not sure that's satisfactory in this instance. And I think the question of what the end state is ought to be wrestled with at least simultaneously, and in an ideal situation precede the military strategy, because what are we even fighting towards if we don't know what the political objective is?
Senator, I think you're absolutely right. And just to reassure you somewhat, we are very much grappling with that. This is a very active, ongoing deliberation both within the government as well as with allies and partners, including in the region. And everyone is focused on not only what's happening right now in Gaza, but exactly as you say, where this lands, where this goes, and in a way that fundamentally and materially changes two things. Changes the security for Israel and changes the situation for Palestinians who have been living under, well before October 7th, a Hamas regime that is in so many ways destroying their lives, misogynistic, repressive, and instead of spending the resources that it was getting to better the lives of Palestinians, spending them instead on building tunnels and building rockets so that it could attack Israel. We need to see a fundamental change in the circumstance of Palestinians living in Gaza, and we need to see a fundamental change, I think, in the circumstance for Palestinians that gets to a state of their own.
Thank you.
Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you both for being here. We know how critical that this hearing has been, and I certainly appreciate your contributions. Iran has a long and well-documented history of being the primary funder of Hamas. Iran has supplied Hamas with the funds, arms, missiles, drones, and other equipment, as well as training and technical expertise. I find it extremely hard to believe that Hamas would have carried out its brutal attack on Israel without Iran's knowledge. Secretary Austin, in the immediate aftermath of Hamas's attack, the administration claimed it did not have evidence that Iran was involved. Is this still this administration's position?
It is from the standpoint of we didn't see direct involvement in the planning or the decision to execute this on a part of Iran. Having said that, the point that you made earlier, Senator, that they have funded, resourced, enabled, trained Hamas operatives means that they have a big part in this. So, but in terms of their actual participation in the planning and the decision to conduct this attack, we didn't see evidence of that.
Do you think they are the puppet master?
I think they are. They certainly control a number of entities throughout the region. Shia militia, Lebanese Hezbollah, and so that's what they do. They export mischief and use other people's resources to carry that out. So.
And Iran continues to illegally sell more than 150 million in petroleum and petroleum products each day, primarily to China. Iran uses these funds to support Hamas, Hezbollah, and other bad actors while oppressing the Iranian people. What more does this administration plan to do to curtail these sales? And I'll direct that to you, Mr. Blinken.
Thank you very much, Senator. First, it's important to note that over the course of this administration, we have sanctioned more than 400 Iranian individuals or entities for things like supporting Hamas. And that's something that continues to this very moment. We're very aggressively engaged in cracking down on financing and support for Hamas, wherever it's coming from, and including and notably Iran. We've also taken action against the so-called ghost shipping of oil and trying to cut off the proceeds from that, and going against different entities that are engaged in that kind of trafficking. And we have a very vigorous effort underway to make sure that wherever we can, we're cutting off Iran from getting illegal proceeds that then turn around and go to finance terror or go to finance its own activities.
And continuing with you, following the Hamas attack, the administration stated that it froze the $6 billion in funds that were cleared for release to Iran in order to secure the release of Americans held hostage by Iran. Is this freeze permanent, and what mechanism is the United States using to freeze these funds?
So let's be very clear about this, because it's important. I'm afraid that some people have been misinformed, and others may be misinforming about the $6 billion. These are funds that accrued from the sale of Iranian oil over many years to an account in South Korea that was established by the previous administration. The proceeds were to be used under our laws and under our sanctions for humanitarian purposes. Those have never been prohibited by our sanctions against Iran. And indeed, the previous administration set up a mechanism to enable any oil proceeds that Iran was getting to be channeled to accounts where they could be controlled and only used for humanitarian purposes. The money in that South Korean account that accrued from the sale of these proceeds, for technical reasons related to Korean banks, was unable to be used, even though it lawfully could be. So it was moved to an account in Qatar where it could be used for humanitarian purposes, just as the previous administration established another account in another country for these very purposes. The money never goes and would never go to Iran. It can only be used for authorized transactions overseen by our Treasury Department, and only for things like food, medicine, and other authorized humanitarian purposes. To date, not a single dollar has been expended from that account. There are currently no plans to expend a single dollar from that account, and in any event, that money never touches Iran directly.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin, for your service always, but especially at this moment. You've both commented through your opening statements and through questions about the interconnectedness of the elements of this supplemental package. Support for Israel in its fight against Hamas, support for Ukraine in its efforts to repel Putin's invasion, support for humanitarian aid for displaced civilians and those caught in the crossfire, a focus on our manufacturing sector and its workforce needs to ramp up production, among many other elements that this package has. You've also both answered questions about the urgency of congressional action, especially given the fact that House Republicans dropped funding for Ukraine from the current continuing resolution that is keeping government running here in the United States. So against this backdrop, I was really taken aback to see calls in the House for dismantling this package and taking it up perhaps only one or two elements of the package. So in terms of urgency, President Zelensky told us, as Senator Durbin mentioned, when we met with him back in September, that without our help, Putin will prevail. And then again, that was followed by a pause in assistance during the current CR. So I just want to ask you, Secretary Austin, to tell this panel in no uncertain terms how urgent it is for us to pass this package in its entirety with respect to keeping Ukraine in this fight.
Thanks, Senator. I think it's absolutely urgent. As you may have heard me say at the very top, they are in a fight. This is not a notional thing. They're fighting to protect their sovereign territory. They're fighting for their existence. And our help has enabled them to do what they've done to date, and they've made credible progress. They have impressed the world with their bravery, with their professionalism, with their determination, and so their goal is to take back as much of their sovereign territory as possible. And I think we need to provide them the ability to continue to do that, and we need to do that urgently.
Thank you. Secretary Blinken, I participated in the same briefing that Senator Merkley referenced earlier with the UN Relief and Works Agency, getting an update on the humanitarian situation in Gaza for those displaced and literally in the crossfire. Among the things we were hearing were just an assessment of what's happening in the hospital, the lack of medical supplies, anesthesia, things like that, and the dwindling, if any, remains in sort of food stocks and storage. You've talked about our efforts to support increasing the number of supply trucks that are able to get in. But again, your own reflections that prior to October 7th and the terrorist attack on Israel, there were 500 to 800 trucks going in a day, and now we're at 50 to 60. How will this humanitarian aid package assist in our leadership in increasing that, and how urgent is it that we pass that part of the entire package?
Thank you very much, Senator. Look, from my perspective and our perspective, it's beyond urgent, precisely for the reasons that you cite. And we are trying to ramp up now to 100 trucks, and my hope is that will happen this week. And as you pointed out, as I pointed out earlier, that's still well less than what was happening before October 7th. But as I also mentioned, on the Gaza side, even if we could get 500 or 600 trucks, we've got an absorptive capacity challenge in terms of the ability of folks on the ground in Gaza to actually receive the assistance, to distribute it, to use it effectively. So that also needs to be ramped up in the middle of a conflict. We're working on both ends to make that happen.
Mr. Secretary, I don't want to interrupt you, but I've been informed that you need to leave at 12:30. We have several senators here who have not had an opportunity to speak. I want to make sure we keep everybody's time to 5 minutes so they have that opportunity.
In any event, yes, it is very urgent. Thank you.
Senator Haggerty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome both secretaries. Secretary Blinken, I'd like to start with you. I sent a letter last week to both yourself and to Administrator Powell asking for specific details on the funding that's gone into Gaza, the foreign assistance funding, U.S. taxpayer dollar foreign assistance funding that's gone into Gaza, the recipients and the subrecipients of that funding. Are you in a position to give me complete answers today to that?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, we've got the letter. We're working on it. You asked important and very detailed questions. We need some time to make sure that we're giving you the most robust and accurate answers possible. So, in short, we will get that back to you.
At a high level, can you tell me the amount of funding overall under your watch that's gone into Gaza?
So overall, we provided about $1 billion in assistance to the Palestinians through the UN Works and Relief Agency.
That's a significant amount of money. I look forward to going through the detailed response you provided, and I appreciate that commitment to do so in a timely fashion. I'd like to tell you why I am asking this. I want to make certain that you can guarantee that not one dime of U.S. taxpayer funding is going to funding that's going to Gaza is going to benefit Hamas and their terrorist activities. Yeah. Has that happened? And I think the question I'd like to ask is, can you guarantee us that no taxpayer money, no U.S. taxpayer money, went to fund the attack that Hamas delivered in Israel on October the 7th?
So we have, and we've had from day one, and we'll obviously get back to you in response to this letter, a robust monitoring, inspection, verification system for the assistance that goes to any international organization, and including.
Can you guarantee, though, that U.S. taxpayer dollars didn't go to Hamas to help fund this attack on October the 7th?
So everything that we're doing in terms of making sure that the assistance is used for purposes for which it's designated, not for other purposes. As I said, we have a robust system in place.
Can I share my concern, Mr. Secretary, to be more specific about this? In May of 2021, I traveled to Israel after the 11-day war. I met with Prime Minister Netanyahu with his national security advisor. They briefed me and my team on the fact that every humanitarian aid dollar, every foreign aid dollar that goes into Gaza is controlled by Hamas. They either direct it, they tax it, or they divert it. They even take pipes intended for the water system for civilians and turn those into rockets that are aimed at Israel. We've seen Hamas's own videos demonstrating this. So I'm going to come back and ask you, can you guarantee that U.S. taxpayer dollars weren't used in October 7th attack?
What I can guarantee is that we take every possible precaution to ensure that these resources are not diverted. Second,
let me come at it another way then, Mr. Secretary, because your own State Department has made an internal assessment on this. Madam Chair, I'd like to submit for the record a set of internal State Department emails from 2021 that were obtained via FOIA. And
No
Secretary
objection.
Blinken, I'd like to specifically read from part of that. The assessment of your own State Department in 2021 is that, quote, due to Hamas's overall strength and level of control over Gaza, there is a high risk that Hamas could potentially derive indirect, unintentional benefit from U.S. assistance to Gaza. Secretary Blinken, do you agree with this assessment?
I do. And here's the challenge that we face, Senator. We have in Gaza somewhere over 2 million people, the overwhelming majority of which, virtually everyone, not a member of Hamas, and indeed increasingly disgusted.
I understand. I'm talking about Hamas's control over the funds, not the citizenship there. And,
Well, no, but
with
it's
respect to
important-
their
it's
control of the funds,
because
can you
we-
guarantee that the U.S. isn't funding both sides of this war, Mr. Secretary?
It is important that the one agency that has the ability to operate either directly or through agencies that it works with, and that we have robust controls in place to ensure that the money.
Let me
is
come
not
back to this
misused.
because I need to reclaim my
is
time. I'm
the-
losing it. Israel has said that Hamas is diverting foreign aid. Hamas has even demonstrated that with their own videos. Your own department has warned about the high risk. And I've yet to see, but I hope to, that where the actual funds flow is coming to Hamas from our government to Gaza. But I'm deeply concerned here, and we need to be convinced that we're not funding both sides of this war, that U.S. taxpayers aren't put in a position of funding a vicious cycle. And I think this department, I think your department needs to confirm that with this committee. We need that level of detail so that as we appropriate a massive request for funding, we can assess the risk ourselves, Mr. Secretary.
And Senator, we'll work with you on that, and we'll get you the information. I want to respond as robustly as we can to your letter. I also want to make sure that we are doing everything we possibly can for the 1 million children in Gaza who desperately need.
I hear you. I
food,
just don't want to see the U.S.
medicine,
taxpayer
support.
funding both sides of this war
Mr.
in Israel with
Secretary,
Hamas.
and I hate to interrupt, and I know you will respond to that, but we want to make sure we get to all the senators that are here. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin, we know you've been working around the clock to protect our friends in Israel and Ukraine. Thank you for your work. Thanks for being here. Secretary Blinken, I want to thank you. At the outset, you described in really horrific detail what happened on October 7th. I think it's important that we be absolutely clear the nature of this brutal terrorist attack. And I share with you the real worry that in this country and around the world, the memory of October 7th, just a few weeks in our rearview mirror, has disappeared. It's incredibly important for us to remind the world about how our nation was changed after September 11th and how Israel has been changed as well by this and how we have an obligation to stand up for them. Secretary Austin, I wanted to talk to you, as Senator Schatz did, about the lessons that we've learned in our counterterrorism operations. I note a story from this weekend in the Washington Post entitled U.S. Urges Israel Against Gaza Ground Invasion Pushes Surgical Campaign. And I don't want to ask you about the confidential communications you've had with your Israeli counterparts, but one of the lessons that we've learned in our counterterrorism operations is that not done well, you can end up creating more terrorists than you kill. In particular, when you are careless about civilian casualties, those civilian casualties become terrorist fuel. They become bulletin board recruiting material for terrorist groups. And so there's a moral imperative to reduce civilian casualties, but there is also a strategic imperative. And so I want to ask you whether you have a worry that the nature of the Israeli ground operation and the number of civilians that have been killed and will be killed could end up strengthening Hamas or other affiliated anti-Israel terrorist groups in the long run.
I agree with everything that you said, Senator, and that is a key lesson that we learned in our in the fights that we fought over the last 20 years or so. The things that you do on the battlefield could, if you're not thoughtful about them, they could create a resistance to your effort that lasts for generations. And so there is an operational and strategic imperative to make sure that we're doing the right things as we outline our objectives and prescribe our techniques about how we're going to go about this. So we've had those conversations for exactly the right the reasons that you mentioned.
Secretary Austin, turning to Ukraine, I think the reason why many of us are so worried about splitting Ukraine aid and Israel aid is because there is an urgency, a real urgency in Ukraine right now. And we know that this place has trouble doing one difficult thing, never mind splitting it into two or three. I know that we're careful about talking about the urgency because we don't want to cause panic or damage morale in Ukraine. But I do think we have to be honest with the American people and with this Senate about the consequences of not funding Ukraine. Admiral Rob Bauer of the Netherlands, who you know well, said that the bottom of the barrel is now visible. And so I just want to ask you a pointed question about ammunition. We are really getting to a point very soon where there are not bullets in the guns. And we need to be serious with our colleagues about the consequences for the rank and file soldiers in Ukraine if we don't get this assistance soon. The need is dire, isn't it?
It absolutely is, Senator. And again, this funds artillery munitions, small arm munitions, you name it, and they desperately need a constant supply of warfighting capability in order to be successful. We would like to see them continue their operations through the winter. I think that's an imperative. They can't do that if we've caused them to pause because there's a pause in the security assistance that we provide.
30 seconds, Secretary Blinken, fuel into Gaza. Do we have a process to deliver fuel into Gaza that assures that it doesn't get diverted to Hamas?
We're working urgently on that. I'll say two things very quickly about it. First, Hamas has its own stockpile of fuel. If it cared a whit about the people of Gaza, it would make sure itself that it used that fuel to have the hospitals be able to operate, have the incubators stay turned on, et cetera. But of course it doesn't. And we have an obligation to do everything we can, if Hamas is not going to do it, to look out for people in Gaza. So we are working on a mechanism that can get fuel to where it's needed, particularly hospitals, bakeries, desalination plants.
Secretary, I'm going to have to interrupt you because, again, you have informed us you need to leave, and I want to make sure as many senators as possible have time. Senator Britt.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairman. I'd like to start by telling you and the Vice Chair how much we appreciate you holding this hearing. It is critically important that we have the opportunity to ask tough questions, to get answers for the American people, and to do our job. You allowing us to be here today will certainly make great strides towards that. Thank you both for being here before this committee. Before we start in on talking about some of the topics that we're here to talk about today, I want to make sure that we make a point on our border. So the National Defense Strategy of our nation promises that first we will defend our homeland. In order to do that, we must secure our border. When we are talking about the number of people here and the number of countries, Secretary Blinken, I'd like to add to the countries that you just said. We have people from Iran, people from Syria, people from Yemen, people from Jordan, people from Lebanon. We know the foothold that Iran has in so many of these nations. Now, these are the people that we have encountered at the border. There exists a problem that we have 1.7 million gotaways into this nation where we don't know who they are, where they're going, or what their intentions are. As we see anti-Semitic behavior rise not only across the oceans, but here in this nation, we must do every single thing that we can to keep our homeland safe, and that starts with securing our border. When we look at what's happening in Israel and the atrocities, I want to thank both of you for going and putting boots on the ground immediately, telling our friends and greatest ally in the Middle East, Israel, that we stand shoulder to shoulder with them, particularly in the face of these barbaric atrocities that occurred on October 7th. Secretary Blinken, thank you for what you just said, talking about what actually happened. I hope that every media outlet plays what you testified to earlier, and that is that we have seen men with their eyeballs gouged out. We saw children watch their parents be executed. We saw families at their breakfast table be tortured and murdered. This must stop. And in order for people in Israel to be able to tuck their children in at night, and people across this globe, we must eradicate Hamas. In doing so, we've got to take the threat of Iran seriously and what they've been doing across the globe, what they've been funding, who they have been training. You said earlier, Secretary Blinken, you agreed with Senator Graham that the normalization efforts with Saudi and Israel, that was one of the links in the chain that led us to where we are today. My question for you is, do you agree that the strategy of what I would call appeasement from this administration that occurred starting with the Obama administration now to here when it's easing off of sanctions, even offering to enter back into talks about the JCPOA, that type of behavior also contributed to where we are today?
Oops. Thank you, Senator. It won't surprise you that I wouldn't agree with that statement, even though I agree with pretty much everything you said right up to that statement. And again, I just point out that when it comes to Iran, two things very quickly. One.
And go ahead. And I know I have a limited time.
Very quickly. We've been engaged in going at Iran for its support in a whole variety of ways for malicious activities throughout the region, including support for terrorism, including destabilization. That's involved, as I said, sanctioning more than 400 Iranian entities and individuals over the last 2.5 years.
And not to cut you off, but I know that she's going to cut me off. So, you know, in order to actually do this, we have to go back to a strategy of maximum pressure. I hope you'll work with your other countries here in G7 to actually do that. Can you commit today that this administration will not resume talks to enter in with Iran to enter the JCPOA?
Well, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals about our diplomacy. I can simply say that it was a big mistake to walk away from the JCPOA, because at least it took one problem off the table, which was Iran's nuclear program. Unfortunately, since we've moved out, Iran has turned that back on. And so that just adds to the threat that Iran poses.
Obviously, we're
being able
going
to deal with
disagree
at least
on
one
that.
problem was a positive.
So we have one more minute. Secretary Austin, when we're looking at what is happening across the Middle East there, particularly with attacks on our troops, do you believe that Iran understands? We more recently heard this administration say that there is a red line. Do you believe that Iran understands what that red line is?
Senator Britt, we've been clear that the protection of our troops is important, and we will do what's necessary to protect them. And this activity has to change. If it doesn't change, we will respond, and again, we'll respond at a time
of our choosing. Yes, and I just want to make sure that we have we been clear with Iran what that red line is? Do they understand that?
We have been clear about what I just said, Senator Britt.
Okay.
Thank you. Senator Manchin.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and thanks both of you all. It's been very enlightening, and it's been very interesting in hearing you all's approach on this. First of all, we know that Ukraine can't succeed without U.S. support. Can Israel succeed without U.S. support? Just yes or no very quickly on that. Either one.
That's correct. My assessment is that if the United States does not continue to support Ukraine, they will not succeed.
Right, but can Israel without our support?
That's right.
Can Israel make it without our support?
I think, no, I think we have to continue to support them as they try to
I'm just
defend
asking you questions that people are asking me. So they're saying, well, we've been giving $3 billion and Israel's very advanced. Ukraine was not. We had to bring them up to speed to be able to fight their fight, and we're committed there. And Secretary Blinken.
I would simply say that on the one hand, Israel prides itself in being able to defend itself by itself, but a critical function of its ability to do that is the support that we provide, including through the memorandum of understanding that was negotiated by the Obama administration to give Israel
So it's justified.
historic
The
levels of
support's
defensive
not only
support.
justified but needed. You're saying it'd be hard to take on all the fronts we're taking on without our support. Next of all, it brings me to the munitions. I know it's been asked about what we can produce. Is the United States running a risk maybe not having enough to defend ourselves if we're pulled into any of these battles because of what we're basically producing? Are we producing enough here with the trusted allies and ourselves, producing enough ammunition to defend our own homeland and help our allies too?
Thanks, Senator. The first order of business for us is to make sure that we have the capability required to defend our nation and protect our interests.
Okay.
And then above and beyond that,
you think we're producing enough? we're ramping up.
Yes.
I know we're trying to.
Yes, we are ramping up, but if we had to only resource ourselves, yes, but we're at a point in time where we're resourcing allies and partners like Ukraine and Israel, and it's going to require more.
I'm just asking the question because people are asking me, are we running ourselves critically low on our own volume of what we need in our own basically inventory, or are we basically overproducing, or can we produce enough, or are we supplying more than what we can produce to backfill? That was a question. The other thing that's been asked to me, first of all, our commitment to win. Our track record hasn't been too good with Vietnam and basically Afghanistan, Ukraine getting out in end result. Are we committed to staying with this to win? Because I believe Ukraine is the most, I just think it's the purpose and the most honorable position we've ever taken in my lifetime of seeing that we were committed to playing the role the United States plays as a defender of freedom and liberties. And when you have a country willing to risk their own life and put their own people on the line, that's the least we can do to support them. So I'm all in on that. But are we committed to staying to stay all the way through? And next of all, on our support to Israel. Israel's got to take out Hamas. Israel has to be supported to do that. And with that, are we committed to make sure that happens? So I think that leads into this final question. People have asked me, says, are the people in the Palestinian people in Gaza, are they committed to the cause, Hamas's cause, basically, and that's why they're not leaving when we've basically been warned that you should leave? That they are being held hostage by Hamas? Can we not get aid to them, making sure it's being used for the purpose of their survivability? And can we not get them out of there? What's holding that back? Secretary Blinken.
We are committed to making sure that that Ukraine has what it needs to defend its sovereign territory. That's why we're here asking you for support.
No problem, but I'm just saying, is there a way to do that? Secretary Blinken, I know you've been over there quite a bit. Both of you all have.
Senator, very quickly, the overwhelming majority of Palestinians living in Gaza are not part of Hamas, don't support Hamas, in fact, are subject to its repressive rule. But these are impoverished people who have virtually no opportunity and so no ability.
You're saying nowhere to go?
So very hard for them to move out of the way, although obviously we're working on that to try to get them out of harm's way. Very little ability to provide for themselves, which is why we're trying to get assistance in. But ultimately, this is their land. We don't want to see them displaced.
Very quickly,
we do want to see different governance.
The problem that we
Gaza.
have, basically, we're saying that $10 billion for humanitarian aid, when we know we can't even get the aid that we're putting in there now going into the hands.
We can, and we are. We're making sure that the assistance going in is going to the people who need it and deserve
Mr.
it,
Secretary,
not people who don't.
I apologize to everyone. The Secretary Blinken has said he has to leave. I respect that. Senator Austin, or Secretary Austin has said he'd stay. We have four
Let me
senators who have not had a chance to ask anything. Senators Rubio, Van Hollen, Fisher, and Murkowski. If you will indulge me, I would like to ask each of those to ask quickly their question for Senator Blinken, or for Secretary Blinken to respond to those.
Can I just have a final?
And Secretary Austin will be here and stay here to answer, and those four we'll call back on you.
I have one final comment I want to make to both of y'all. This is a bipartisan, so when you hear all of my Republican colleagues saying about how important it is to secure our own borders, I want you to know it's bipartisan. I've got more concern about our own borders from my own people in West Virginia, and I want to make sure that you understand that we will do anything and everything humanly possible to support securing the borders of the United States of America.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Senator Rubio, Van Hollen, Fisher, and Murkowski to simply ask a question. Mr. Secretary, if you can respond to those together, and then I will call on all of you to ask Secretary Austin a question. Senator Rubio.
Well, since I only have one question, no one else is going to ask you about this, and it's unrelated to this matter, tangentially anyway. We recently did a deal with the Maduro regime in Venezuela, in which we lifted sanctions in exchange for free and fair elections that they were supposed to comply with. It's taken them 2 weeks now. They have violated that. They canceled the opposition's primary election, continue to ban their winner of that primary. They basically wiped out the election. They've broken the deal. Are we going to reimpose sanctions?
Senator Van Hollen, question, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, in the aftermath of the horror visited upon Israel by Hamas and the ongoing war in Gaza, much of the world has turned its eye away from what's happening on the West Bank. And what we're seeing, and our own folks on the ground have been reporting this on a daily basis, is that with support of extremists in the Netanyahu government, people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, extremist settler violence against Palestinians has skyrocketed as more Palestinians are pushed off their land in Area C. As you know, all this does is strengthen Hamas, undermine the already weak PA, and open another front in this war. I know the president has raised this issue with Prime Minister Netanyahu, but according to every report I get, and I know both you secretaries get these, we've seen no improvement. So my question is pretty simple. What is your plan beyond urging that something be done when our pleas continue to be ignored?
Senator Fisher, question, please. No question. Senator Murkowski.
Given the overlay that we have heard, the interconnectedness between what is happening in Ukraine with Putin's war, what we are seeing truly explode now in Israel by Hamas with the support of Iran, given what we have all been discussing here with regards to the tension in China and Taiwan. We're not talking about North Korea today, but we should always be thinking about North Korea's intentions. This is a simple question that I was going to ask both of you. Given the situation globally and what is at play and how it all intersects, are we at a time and a place where, from a national security perspective, we are as vulnerable as we have been as a nation, in your professional estimation?
Mr. Secretary, your responses, please.
Thank you, and I very much appreciate the accommodation. I want to try to quickly answer, at least address initially the questions that were raised before I leave. Senator Rubio, thank you very much for the question about Venezuela. As you know, following the agreement that the unitary platform, the opposition, reached with the regime on a way forward toward elections, we wanted to support that, and part of supporting that was to encourage that to move forward, including by lifting some sanctions with the ability, of course, to snap them back or to put some licenses in place that can be revoked very quickly. If the regime has in fact violated the agreement that it reached, then of course we'll take the necessary action. We've been very clear about that. They're not getting a free pass for actions that they take that are in contradiction to the commitments that they've made to move toward free and fair elections, which is a shared objective that we have with the opposition with the unitary platform. So we're tracking that very carefully and happy to come back to you further as this moves along. Senator Van Hollen, with regard to the West Bank, we very much share the concern that you've expressed. Palestinian Authority is doing everything that it can to keep security, to keep stability in the West Bank. It's vastly under-resourced. This is another aspect of the problem. And we've urged the Israelis, for example, to provide the authority with the resources that it needs that are being held back, tax revenues and other fees that it collects and then normally gives to the authority so that it can do its business, to release those. And at the same time, the President himself has been very clear, very direct, and very explicit about our concerns about extreme settler violence and the impact that that's having on the West Bank, including adding fuel to the fire. We've seen that people have been, in effect, forcibly displaced from their communities as well as killed. So this is something that we are in direct communication and conversation with the Israeli government at the very highest levels, and something we're tracking very carefully.
Tony, if I could add, just,
please.
You know, I mentioned earlier I talk to my counterpart nearly every day. And this is something that I bring up every time I talk to him. As you mentioned, Senator, I'm watching these reports, and some of the things that we're seeing are fairly disturbing, and it will work against them going forward if they don't make a decision to control this better.
Thank you. Really needs to stop.
And then, Senator Murkowski, I think I would say this. We see the challenges that we've been discussing today. You also mentioned North Korea, another challenge that we take with dead seriousness. That's on one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is this. There's never been a time in my own experience where we've had greater unity of purpose, greater unity of action, greater convergence with our partners in Europe, our partners in Asia, and indeed in other parts of the world than we have now in facing exactly those problems. We built a coalition of more than 50 countries to help deal with the aggression that Putin is committing in Ukraine, an extraordinary coalition that is supporting Ukraine in so many different ways, as well as dealing with broader problems that Russia poses. At the same time, we built much greater convergence than I've ever seen on how to deal with and approach the challenges posed by China. And we see that in Asia itself. We see that in our relationships with everyone from Korea to Japan to the Philippines to Vietnam to India, countries wide and far, as well as in Europe. So I'm very comforted by the fact that because we've revitalized, re-energized, re-engaged our core alliances and partnerships, our greatest strength, and built new ones and brought them together in new ways, we have tremendously effective groupings of countries that are prepared to deal with these challenges.
Thank you, and thank you. I understand you have a meeting with the Speaker and appreciate your answering those questions. I will
Thank
go
you, Madam
back
Chair.
to the senators who've not had a chance now. Secretary Austin, thank you for your willingness to stay and answer the final questions. Senator Rubio.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, I wanted to ask you, and really I'll just be, I guess, very quick in respect for all the people's time here. These attacks from these, we continue to call them proxies, they're basically agents of the IRGC and the Iranians. They would not be occurring without the Iranians not just permitting them, but frankly facilitating them. And the Iranians would not facilitate or permit them because, in fact, there was a pause in those attacks for some period of time. They would not facilitate or permit them unless they calculated that these attacks do not cross some threshold in their mind that if they cross that threshold, it would trigger a price, a response, a price they don't want to pay, a response they don't want to see. At this moment, I do not believe that we can argue that we have a deterrence in place with these attacks. And this is more of a comment than it is a question, although you're obviously free to comment, and I think we're very interested to hear what your response will be. But it is my deep belief that I hope is shared by the department that if we do not, I don't want a broader war with Iran. None of us have talked about it. I'm not one of those people that have out there been talking about airstrikes and starting a war with Iran. Is a tinderbox to begin with. But if we do not have a credible, not just a deterrence, a credible deterrence with the Iranians, these attacks are going to escalate. They're going to come faster. They're going to spread beyond Syria and Iraq, and they will involve weaponry of increasing sophistication and lethality. And that is my biggest fear, is that we will find ourselves, if we do not soon establish a credible deterrent, they will begin to cross lines that will require not just a defensive posture on our front, but imposing a cost on them. One of the biggest, obviously, I share all the comments that have been made here about the horrifying incident involving Hamas and everything they've done in the past and moving forward, the need to stand with our allies. But I think this is the one that this is the one that has the threat to quickly spiral out of control, is that these groups escalating these attacks to include more places at a faster clip with more lethality and sophistication if we do not establish a credible deterrent quickly.
Senator, I agree with you that if they're not convinced that we will do what's necessary to protect our troops, then they will continue on as they are. But I've been clear, the President's been clear that that's something that we won't tolerate, and we will do what's necessary to protect our troops. You saw me move another carrier battle group. Actually, it's in the Med now. It's headed to the Gulf region. That gives us more capability, more strike capability. We have additional aircraft in the region now. We have the punch that's necessary to protect our interests, and we're going to do what's necessary to do that.
Well, I have no question that we have the assets positioned in the region to impose a cost on Iran that they do not want to pay. I hope we never have to do it. I guess the fundamental question really becomes, do they believe we would actually do it? I understand the complexity of the situation where something could trigger and suddenly this thing begins to move in a direction that spirals out of control. What I have real concerns about is their perception of what we are willing to do may not match up with what we're actually willing to do. Hence, at this moment, we do not have a credible deterrent. And I sense from your answer that you share that concern. Sometimes, even when we say things, they may not believe us, even if we have the capability to do it. So it's one of those situations where we don't want there to be a shooting war, certainly, and seeing this thing escalate. But I think one of the things that guarantees escalation is the lack of a credible deterrent. It's a complex and serious matter, and one that I hope it sounds like you share my concern about it quickly spiraling here, primarily because of Iranian perceptions of our willingness, not our capability, but our willingness to take deterrent action.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Austin, thank you for your service. And I agree that we have to provide the people of Ukraine with military assistance that they need to defend themselves against Putin's aggression. And President Biden is right to stand with Israel in its hour of need. All of us have been repulsed by the horror and brutality of the Hamas terror attacks that left over 1,400 innocent Israelis murdered, including women and children, including those massacred at Kibbutz Kfar Aza, which I visited in June. When scaled to the size of the U.S. population, that is comparable to over 40,000 Americans killed, a horror that will never be erased. So all of us agree that Israel not only has the right, but the duty to defend itself and eliminate the threat from Hamas. Hamas must immediately release all the hostages, and as Israel conducts its operations, many of us believe it should prioritize returning the hostages safely home. Also, as President Biden has said, it must conduct its operations in accordance with the laws of war, not only because taking all possible measures to avoid civilian casualties and human suffering is morally and legally required, but that it is also in the best strategic interests of the United States and Israel to do so, something both you and Secretary Blinken have affirmed today. The President has been very clear about the need to distinguish between Hamas and the overwhelming number of Gaza's over 2 million Palestinian civilians who have nothing to do with Hamas. But some members of Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition have indicated that all Palestinians in Gaza are responsible for the horror visited upon Israel. And Israel has imposed, as you know, a full siege on the people of Gaza, cutting off most water, food, medicine, electricity, and fuel shipments. Secretary Blinken described the desperate humanitarian situation in his testimony today, but to date, we have only seen a trickle of the needed humanitarian aid crossing the Rafah border. I saw the readout from your conversation today with Minister Gallant, where you indicated, and I quote, that humanitarian law requires that there be unfettered humanitarian assistance. So, Mr. Secretary, simple question. We've got a trickle going. You would agree that in the interests of humanitarian law and helping innocent people in Gaza, we have to do a lot better? Simple question.
I agree, Senator, and as I said earlier, it's a moral and operational and strategic imperative. If you fail to do that, then I think we're going to create a problem that they will create a problem, a bigger problem for themselves.
Now, the siege is being accompanied by a ferocious bombing campaign. In just the first 6 days of the war, Israel dropped 6,000 bombs in the densely populated Gaza Strip. Israel has stopped reporting the number of bombs being dropped, but the intense pace has continued. Last night, my wife and I learned that someone we know well lost 2 family members and 4 of their children killed in bombing in Gaza. So they are not yet included in the most recent death toll reported by the United Nations yesterday, which says the number of dead has risen to over 8,300 people, 70% of them women and children, including 3,457 children. These are UN figures. According to UN figures, that is about 6 times more children killed in 3 weeks in Gaza than the number of children killed in Ukraine during the entire war there. And if you scale the death of those Palestinian children to the United States population, it's comparable to over 230,000 American children killed. The executive director of UNICEF, Catherine Russell, said at the current rate, more than 420 children are being killed or injured in Gaza each day, a number, she said, which should shake us to our core. I agree. Now, Mr. Secretary, I know that people on opposing sides of this conflict provide different reasons for why the death toll is so high. And you are right about Hamas's despicable practices of operating among civilians. But regardless of the explanation, we must not look away from these terrible facts. You and the President have repeatedly said that Israel must comply with the rules of war. But as we consider additional American military assistance to Israel's fight in Gaza, don't we have an obligation not only to state that expectation, but to ensure that our support is used in a manner that complies with the laws of war and U.S. law? That's my question, Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, we will continue to emphasize to our allies here the necessity to account for the civilians that are in the battle space. They are a part of the battle space. They must account for them. They must do the right thing in terms of taking that into consideration as they do their targeting. They must create.
Mr. Secretary, with respect, my question is a little different. My question is, now that we're talking about
Senator Van Hollen, I apologize. Secretary Austin has just a few minutes left. We still have 4 senators.
All right, additional assistance, don't we now have an obligation, not just a stated expectation, for that to be the case?
Thank you. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. While I appreciate Secretary Austin and Secretary Blinken testifying today, I will echo my colleagues' sentiment and say that I'm disappointed Secretary Mayorkas is not here. However, I am very, very pleased to hear that he will be before this committee next week, because there is a national security crisis at our southern border. And this administration must make serious policy changes to address the crisis. I look forward to hearing from Secretary Mayorkas on how the administration intends to address that crisis. 24 days ago, Israel suffered the worst terrorist attack in its history. Israel has the right and the responsibility to respond to these barbaric attacks. We can best help them by giving them the time and resources they need to eliminate Hamas. The atrocities committed by Hamas demand nothing less. The administration's request included over $14 billion for Israel, including $5.2 billion to replenish their Iron Dome and David Sling systems and accelerate development of their Iron Beam system, and $3.5 billion in foreign military financing. I strongly support the full
inclusion of this request in the supplemental funding bill that this committee will draft. The administration has also requested significant funding for Ukraine. I would note that while many of our allies and partners are capable of providing generous humanitarian and economic assistance packages, only the United States can provide Ukraine with lethal aid at the scale that it needs. That is where we should focus our efforts as a country. But we can only continue to provide lethal aid if we aggressively expand our munitions production capacity. And we do that here at home. And that's a point that's being lost by many. A significant portion of the funding request is to replenish and build out U.S. capacity. The United States faces threats from around the world, from Russia, China, Iran. Earlier this month, the bipartisan bicameral Congressional Commission on the Strategic Posture of the United States released its final report on America's strategic posture. The report, unanimously endorsed by the commissioners, found that we will soon face a security situation that, quote, the United States did not anticipate and for which it is not prepared, end quote. I'm working with my colleagues to turn many of the Commission's recommendations into law, but fundamentally, we simply do not have the workforce, supply chain, or infrastructure necessary to meet the coming threats. Building out this capacity, it's going to take time and resources, but we can start now by making targeted investments in our munitions production base. The administration's supplemental request includes over $18 billion to replenish our own weapons stockpiles and over $4.6 billion to expand production capacity for those critical munitions. This is a step in the right direction, and I will support its inclusion in the supplemental funding bill. Secretary Austin, what would be the impact of not including replenishment funding in the appropriations package for this supplemental?
Thanks, Senator. We would lose the ability to do the kinds of things that we've done with Ukraine and Israel in support of our allies in a time of need.
And what does it do to our own national security?
Well, it certainly, as I said earlier, we will maintain the ability to defend this country and protect our interests. But this additional capability gives us the ability to address emerging crises. And so I think without that, we would be challenged to do the kinds of things that we've done here in the past.
You know, I know it's important that we continue to do that for our allies and partners, but it helps our own stockpile requirements. And that includes expanding the production lines for long-range precision-guided munitions as well. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct, Senator. And you know,
which we need for the Pacific, right?
That's right. And you know that some of these munitions are long lead time in terms of what it takes to produce them. And so we're looking at ways to shorten some of those timelines, to increase capacity, to automate production lines, to address some of the issues that you raised earlier.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As chairman of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, I know how important it is for us to secure our northern and southern border and provide law enforcement with the resources that they are going to need to complete that mission. And that's why I'm very pleased to see substantial funding in the supplemental to support border operations as well as security for our country. But I also believe we can't stop there. We also must work with international partners to understand some of the root causes of the increased migration that we're seeing show up at our border and commit adequate resources to addressing those challenges. I know Secretary Blinken had another engagement that he had to leave, but I have a number of questions for him that I will be submitting to the record as to how that we work internationally to deal with border security here in our country. But Secretary Austin, thank you for staying for additional time. You've been very generous with your time. My question is, with the recent escalation of violence and attacks that are aimed at U.S. Personnel in the Middle East now, I remain concerned about the Air Force's decision to divest the A-10 aircraft. Notably, the DoD recently deployed A-10s to further deter Iran and their proxies that may seek to attack U.S. forces and in the process destabilize the region even more than it already is. As you know, my home state of Michigan is the home of the 107th Fighter Squadron, a unit certainly capable of providing air support to our troops and allies should they be called upon. And my question for you, Secretary, is clearly the Department of Defense has recognized the need for this aircraft's very unique capabilities and are deploying those fighters right now in support of operations related to this contingency. So my question for you is this current conflict causing the department to reconsider A-10 divestment, or at a minimum, perhaps delaying some of those divestitures, given the fact that there is a mission today and will very likely continue at least in the foreseeable future?
Well, thanks, Senator. You know, I have personally benefited from the capability of the A-10, so I have great respect for the platform. And the A-10 will be with us for the near term. But I've asked you for $61.1 billion in my FY24 budget to invest in air power so that we can remain the dominant force. And so we're going to have to transition over time to address the new challenges that we'll face with peer competition. And we're making an effort to do that. And we'll have to make some choices down the road. But we're going to have to continue to make that transition, but they will be with us for the near term. So.
Good. Well, as you talk about the future, certainly we have to be focused, and warfare is changing dramatically. But I believe that the very close working relationship and security cooperation that we have with Israel is incredibly important to that task. The U.S. and Israel have some of the world's most innovative technologies, as you're well aware of, and now more than ever, we need to continue to develop those. This Congress, I introduced, along with bipartisan support from Senator Fisher, the U.S.-Israel Future of Warfare Act, which authorized $50 million to create the U.S.-Israel Future Warfare Research and Development Fund to increase collaboration in areas of artificial intelligence, drone and cybersecurity, directed energy, and automation. That is a $50 million authorization. Given the current conflict, given the rapidly changing nature of warfare, how important is that we make those investments, and should we be prepared to make even more investments and may have an even closer cooperative agreement with Israel and the IDF?
Well, thanks, Senator. Thanks for your work. I certainly won't comment on pending legislation. What I will say, though, is that we are great partners. We have done a number of things together. And Israel, as you pointed out, is a source of innovation. Excuse me. And our work together, I think, will continue to create advantages for us in the future battle space. So we look forward to that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think this is probably the most important and most significant hearing that we have had here in the Congress this year. This is not only about the United States and our national security. It's about food security, as we heard earlier. We haven't really talked about energy security, but there's a dynamic there as well. This is significant that this committee is weighing in to evaluate this supplemental request. My hope is that we are able to take the contours of this, which is absolutely the imperative and the support for Ukraine, absolutely the imperative and support for Israel, also recognizing that we must do more when it comes to our own border here in this country, but also a piece that we haven't really talked much about here today, and that's the Indo-Pacific piece. There is a small increment here, or a smaller insignificant in relative terms to the other areas. But recognizing that we will be doing some adjustment within those contours, those 4 pillars, and how they intersect and how they allow this proposal to move forward, I think is so very, very important. I was reading something this morning, Madam Chairman, as I'm coming in. It was a statement that said something to the effect that in the United States, we lead through the power of our example, but we also need the example of our power, and that example of our power is manifested through our defense appropriations. And so as we're talking about the need for replenishment of our own stocks, and then what that can do to help Ukraine, what we must do then to help Israel. Mr. Secretary, can you speak to the Indo-Pacific piece? There's $2 billion included for state, for foreign military financing. In your view, why is it imperative that we also include in this package an increment for the Indo-Pacific?
Well, thanks, Senator. As you know from our strategy, our national defense strategy, China is our pacing challenge. And as we look at China's behavior in the Indo-Pacific, we are increasingly concerned. So we must have the ability to continue to be able to deter China and to promote a free and open Indo-Pacific. And so we're going to continue that work. In this request, we've asked you for $3.3 billion to invest in our submarine industrial base. That will help us with our efforts with AUKUS. And as you know, AUKUS is a generational capability that I think will do great things in enabling us to promote security and stability in the Indo-Pacific. We've also asked for $3 billion or so to build more capacity in our industrial base so we can produce greater quantities of munitions and weapons. And so I think that investment is going to apply to the Indo-Pacific as well.
I appreciate that. Madam Chairman, a question has not yet been asked in this hearing about the impact, the implication of a long-term CR. I know we're talking about an emergency supplemental now, but our reality is in 18 short days, we will once again be beyond where our budget is now. Mr. Secretary, if we were to go to a long-term CR, given the state of the world right now and the role that we play in it, what would that mean?
It would be it would make things much more difficult for us, Senator. You can't buy back time, and this takes away the time the time we have to conduct to affect new starts, the time that we have to go after specific projects, to invest in capabilities, and you just can't buy that back. Our budget is directly linked to our strategy, and so if we don't have the full budget, we're not able to execute the strategy to the degree that we planned it. And so I think this is critical, and I think it's really, really important that we get an on-time appropriation if possible.
Thank you, Madam
Thank you very much. Senator Sinema.
Better time than now to show our committee's unity and Congress's commitment to advancing our shared values. America's adversaries are watching how we act and how we react, while actors across the globe that stand against everything we as Americans believe in actively try to destabilize and destroy democracies. We must pass legislation to support Israel, Ukraine against Putin, and Arizona's border. Each of these three are urgent concerns and should advance together, as they are all critical for both my state and for our country's national security. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are strengthening partnerships to undermine America's interests and create chaos, while Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East, and Ukraine, a critical supporter of Americans' values, continue to be attacked. At the same time, at home in Arizona, we know there's a clear crisis at our border, and cartels are using the porous border to smuggle migrants and dangerous drugs into our state, weakening our national security. So the supplemental request includes resources for Ukraine to fight against Putin, to support Israel in her time of need, and border security all in one package. And I encourage my colleagues to join me in doing the bipartisan work that's necessary to address all of these priorities. Secretary Austin, the request includes additional appropriations for Iron Dome and David Sling replenishment. I agree we need to quickly surge production to support significant replenishment in Israel as soon as possible. Now, we've been talking about capacity shortfalls and revitalizing the defense industrial base for years. This request, however, only includes $200 million to mitigate industrial base constraints to allow for faster production of weapons and equipment. Can you speak to the impact of this funding in the context of supporting multiple conflicts?
Thanks, Senator. That $200 million that you're speaking of is focused on PDA, our PDA efforts. And the larger amount that we're asking for to invest in the industrial base is $3 billion. And so that's a component of the bigger number. And again, I think all the things that we're doing to replenish our stocks, to enable Ukraine to purchase new equipment from the United States, all those things also contribute. But we specifically asked for $3 billion in this request to focus on the industrial base. And again, that $200 million is a component of that, not the total amount.
So the request includes provisions for the, quote, expansion of facilities for the purpose of increasing production of critical munitions. How quickly will these investments lead to increased capacity?
It'll vary. In some cases, you know, industry can move fairly quickly. In other cases, for more sophisticated items like javelins and stingers and those kinds of things, it will take a bit longer. But we're working with industry each and every day to do everything we can to send the right signals so that they can invest in the right things and be able to expand where required.
So we've been supplying our Ukrainian allies with munitions to push back on Russian aggression for almost 2 years now. There are numerous reports that suggest that the manufacturing of those munitions and supplies is not yet keeping pace with demand, and that we're depleting our own stockpiles at a fairly significant rate. Of course, now we're going to send some of that inventory to Israel as well, which I am supportive of. But as we look to support Israel and Taiwan, in addition to Ukraine, against the aggression that all three of them face, are you worried that this could put too much stress on our inventory? And if so, can targeting software that improves the accuracy of our munitions help? And is that software investment reflected in the supplemental package?
Well, we have the most accurate and lethal weapons in the world. And in terms of our targeting, we're always looking for ways to do things better and more efficiently. But the specifics of those things, I'll leave to my great airmen, who are the best in the world. In terms of the depletion of our stocks, again, as I said a number of times here today, we will make sure that we maintain what's necessary to defend this country and protect our interests. And I won't change that direction of travel.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank all of our colleagues for a really thoughtful discussion. Secretary Austin, thank you for sharing your time and knowledge with us. You know, if there's one takeaway from this conversation today, it should be that these global challenges that we face, the war in Ukraine, terrorism in Israel, humanitarian needs for those who are caught in the conflict, and the posturing of the Chinese government in the Indo-Pacific region. These challenges may be distinct, but they are all connected and they all are urgent. We have to respond to all of them in a comprehensive way that sends an unmistakable message to the world that American leadership is still strong and our resolve has not wavered. So I'm going to make sure we take what we have learned today into account as we continue working together to craft a comprehensive security package that meets this pivotal moment and lives up to our promises to stand by our allies, stand for democracy, and stand up for civilians. I hope all of our colleagues will continue to work with me and Vice Chair Collins to make sure we avoid insufficient half measures and get all of our allies the robust support that they need. And of course, I do believe we need to continue to work to address our domestic priorities like the child care crisis, situation at the border, and more. That will end our hearing today. For any senators who wish to ask additional questions for the record will be due in 7 days on Tuesday, November 7th at 5 p.m. The hearing record will also remain open until then for members who do wish to submit additional materials for the record. With that, committee stands adjourned.
website what they have. I forgot to pay actually parking ticket. Let me park